Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Shaping the City. For this afternoon session, we are very happy to kick off with a quite special presentation, since we don't have architects on stage, but we have artists and educators on stage. So we are very happy to have two professors from Deakin University, David Cross and Cameron Bishop, who are going to share with us their experience in working with local city governments and to share about the role that artists and academics in the arts play in order to shape our cities. And we are more than happy to do so, also since, as you know, the European Cultural Center has not only their architecture program and the architecture exhibition, but every second year we also have a wonderful program in the arts. And also next year we're going to have again the personal structures exhibitions, which is going to run from April 20th until November 24th next year. And our next presenters had the chance to, and we had the pleasure to have them in our personal structures 2019. And we're going to have them again back next year in 2024. So I have the pleasure to introduce David and Cameron. David Cross is professor of visual arts at Deakin. Working as an artist, curator, and writer, his practice extends across performance, installation, sculpture, public art, and video. Known for his examination of risk, pleasure, and participation, David often utilizes inflatable structures to negotiate interpersonal exchange. He has performed in International Live Art Festival in Poland and Croatia, and was selected as a New Zealand representative at the 2011 Prague Quadriennial. Cameron Bishop is an artist, writer, and curator, lecturing in the art and performance art at Deakin University. As a curator, he has helped initiate a number of public art projects and the ongoing Vacant Geelong project with architectural and creative arts researchers and leading Australian artists to explore and activate spaces left behind by deindustrialization. His work explores the shifting nature of the term public, ideas around placemaking, and the body's appearance. With David Cross, he has worked on consultancy projects, including the Metro Tunnel Creative Strategy. So we are very happy today to have David and Cameron. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think it's, we don't want to appear as fish out of water here, of course, and originally the program notes suggested we were here for 20 minutes, but I see we have a little bit more time. And usually in many of the public presentations that we do, we actually start off with a prompt and provocation around how to think about public art and the sort of interventions that public art brings to urban spaces and suburban spaces, particularly on the periphery, which is often where we work. If we think about the periphery of cities, but also the periphery of politics as well, and what the voting public at the edges of those cities are thinking about various issues. And we start with a quote from Hannah Arendt, and it's actually about the public realm, and it draws on her table metaphor, which was used in the last presentation. So I'm just going to read that briefly. So the public realm, as the common world, gathers us together and yet prevents our falling over each other, so to speak. What makes mass society so difficult to bear is not the number of people involved, or at least not primarily, but the fact that the world between them has lost its power to gather them together, to relate and separate them. The weirdness of this situation resembles a spiritualistic seance where a number of people gathered around a table might suddenly, through some magic trick, see the table vanish from their midst, so that two persons sitting opposite each other were no longer separated, but also would be entirely unrelated to each other by anything tangible. And that was written in 1958, and I think it was extremely prescient, particularly for the digital age and the social relations inside that space and across networked spaces. So for us, one of our missions in making the work that we do is to actually reconstruct that table, if we can see that kind of metaphor playing out with the sort of crazy interventions that we're going to introduce you to today. So I will kick through to the first slide.
So yeah, as Cameron said, our focus is, as academic researchers, is the commissioning of temporary public sculpture, temporary public art practice. And our fundamental focus has been on peri-urban commissioning rather than urban commissioning. So, and I'll maybe briefly explain a little bit in a moment why that is. But just to begin with a little bit of an introduction about Melbourne. So I don't know how many people in this room have ventured that far south. Can I see a show of hands? Anyone been to Melbourne? Oh, 2 hands, well that's good. Melbourne is the most southern metropolis in the world, at the very southern tip of the Australian mainland continent. And it is a city of some 5.5 million people. It's quite a large city. It's increasingly becoming the biggest city in Australia. The city that we live in, Melbourne, has had continuous custodianship from the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation for over 60,000 years. And it has had a colonial presence since 1835, when a series of squatters from Tasmania, or Van Diemen's Land, saw an enormous commercial value in moving into that particular part of Australia, which was currently then not occupied by colonial powers. And from that period of time, Melbourne has grown as a metropolis from 1835, but we don't have a treaty with our First Nations people. Some of you may have heard, I don't know whether it's been in the media in Italy, but we recently had a referendum in our country about acknowledging and representing First Nations people in our constitution, with an constitutionally entrenched voice to Parliament. And this was about 6 weeks ago, and unfortunately that constitutional amendment failed by 60% to 40%. So I think it's important to preface any conversation that we have about our city with the idea that there has been a continuous custodianship for over 60,000 years. A treaty has never existed with our First Nations people, and so Melbourne is very much a colonised city. And I think to understand that shaping of the city is important in terms of framing the way that we've attempted to operate. But at the same time, I think it's really significant to say that. The other couple of things I might say about Melbourne is it is actually larger in its urban sprawl than London. So it's a city that's not dissimilar to Los Angeles in that it feels, because of the scale and size of Australia, that it's okay to continually expand into ever expanding spaces of suburbia. So it's an exceptionally suburban city. And I think that idea of sprawl, I know there's an Italian description for sprawl, which I don't know if anyone can help me with the idea, but there's an Italian description for what that is. And Melbourne's very much a city that suffers from that problem. So just to kind of introduce Melbourne it's also a place of very significant multicultural immigration, major waves of Italian, Greek and Vietnamese populations coming out after the Second World War and the Vietnam War. So as a city, we have a great degree of cultural complexity, but the gaping wound in our culture is an inability to build a treaty with our own First Nations people.
So switching from the cultural, I guess, to the elemental, Melbourne's also a city feeling the impacts of climate change already. We've had a huge bushfire in 2009 where the temperature rose to an extraordinary 47 degrees on that day, which was pretty much unheard of until then. In 2019, we were surrounded by fires, and you can see the photograph here. We were living for weeks on end in under a pillow of smoke, and it's kind of a paradoxical scenario that we live in terms of the state versus private interests over in Australia, in that, you know, all of the councils that we work with are on board. They have climate change strategies in place. And yet at the level of the media, which is mostly owned by Rupert Murdoch and other private interests, so Rupert Murdoch owns 70% of our newspapers in our country. Hence we have, well, you know, you could say that impacts on people's voting patterns. But it's the messages that they send through around climate denialism actually really impacts on the way that people think about that issue and issues of sustainability and environmental care. So that's important for us in the projects that we do. So the two projects we're going to introduce you to, I guess, start from the centre, and the first one for us started in 2016, and maybe David, you could chat about that.
So Melbourne has interesting public transport. It's famous for its trams, like some European cities, but it doesn't have an extensive underground rail network. And so one of the major pieces of infrastructure of the last 10 or 15 years has been to build the Metro Tunnel, which is a series of stations underneath Melbourne. And what was a really important element of this is that they began with a cultural policy. So Cameron and I worked together to build a cultural policy around how that series of stations would operate. And we had a kind of an ethos that looked across temporary practice, legacy practice, and embedded practice. So we were interested in the relationship between artists and embedded architecture in that side. We were interested in the idea of objects being created on a, if not permanent basis, a legacy basis. And also very interested in the idea of the temporal, so the idea of temporary projects that were constantly woven through. And the station network was 7 different stations, and so it was really great to be able to think through holistically what that might look like and how we might be able to embed a dynamic cultural program that really also prefaced, you can see the picture there of Marie Clark, a very important First Nations artist in Australia. Thinking through again how the stories of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation may be embedded in that space, and also probably agitating for the naming of the stations to also take on a First Nations context, because we're not a bilingual country in the sense that we rarely have Aboriginal names on our signage, unlike countries like New Zealand, which is very close to us. So the Metro Tunnel project was a very complex one. Politically, it was extremely complex. We built a policy that we then allowed a whole raft of other artists to begin to enter into that space and develop their projects over time.
Yes, and Marie Clark, as David said, is one of the first artists that was commissioned, and she's been commissioned to work laterally across the entire network for the line-wide commission, which actually is meant to, I guess, join each station and tell stories of indigeneity and First Nations on that country, most importantly. So she, for that reason, was a really key artist for the project to get across the line and kind of set the bar for what was to come for the individual stations and the artists that were going to be commissioned there.
The other policy that has traditionally operated in Australia around public practices in big infrastructure is that it's brought in at the end as window dressing or aesthetics. So there's a lot of what we call plonk art, which is taking something and plonking it without grappling in a sophisticated way with place or the history of that place. So this work by Marie Clark was brilliant because it was enabling her work to straddle and move across through that whole network. And it happened at the very beginning of the project rather than at the end. So I think the idea of being able to have an impact culturally when the economic forces or the engineering forces are very dominant, or the political forces, it was a fantastic project to be able to do that.
Yeah, so that was 2016, and I guess you could say we were starting in the centre then, most definitively. But we were also working with an infrastructure that was well and truly celebrated for the fact that it was $7 billion. It was going to revolutionise travel through Melbourne, which already has an underground suburban train network, but it's only 5 stations, I think, and goes around the city, whereas this one was going to come through and kind of dissect it and then go out to the suburbs, and the furthest suburbs in Melbourne are some 50 kilometres away. So at the time, we were also interested in the sort of hidden infrastructural networks of Melbourne. And this is where we turn to look at the sewerage system. There's a bit of a slide there. I was meant to cue that. Here we go. So this is where we landed at the Werribee treatment plant, which is about 35 kilometres outside of Melbourne. We literally followed, I suppose, the sewage line out to this site, which is some 10,000 hectares and is Melbourne's oldest and largest wastewater treatment plant. We were lucky enough to build a rapport and ultimately a partnership with Melbourne Water that now runs this facility. It started out, it was built in the 1890s, so there is now heritage value around collecting around that older infrastructure. And it's allowed us to bring a variety of artists in, working across a whole host of media to celebrate the technologies, the histories, the cultures of this site in particular over the first 2 iterations of a big public art project that we've run through this area, primarily to introduce people to, the fascinating practices of these artists, but equally important to introduce through contemporary art the fascinating, as I said, histories, technologies and cultures of this place, and connect people to place, and at the same time rebut or challenge some of the stigma that's been built up around the communities that live very close to this 10,000 hectare site. So there's a community called Werribee, which is now a city of some 50,000 people, and jokes are still made about Werribee because Werribee is where you need to wind your window up as you drive through it because of the smells coming out of the sewage farm. So there's a great stigma, there's great stereotype, and also a lot of poo jokes that have been made about Werribee over the years that we were asked to challenge and contrast against.
What's really incredible for us is that we've been on this project for 9 years and it doesn't seem to have an end point. So we've done 3 quite large temporary public art projects with different artists, grappling, as Cameron said, with ideas of the history. So in a sense, this project is grounded in a celebration of a lost history because there used to be a community that lived on the sewage plant up until the 1970s, and it had its own complete infrastructure, town halls, ovals, sporting, everything. And then with the advent of the car and with basically the demise of the kinds of technologies that were being used to run the farm, they shut the entire community down. So a community that had lived productively and in very complex ways for over 100 years was no longer there. So our interest partly in this project is also going back in and telling stories or celebrating elements of the social fabric of that community which is not there. But on top of that, the other thing about this particular site, it has the second largest collection of birds in the southern hemisphere congregating, and it's partly because it's it's an incredibly water-focused facility. But the sheer nature of the richness of the flora and fauna is in contradistinction to our ability to access it. So the only people that ever go to this plant are usually bird watchers who come and see various species that kind of migrate there. But the other dimension to the project is also technology and environment. We're very fascinated with the way in which the plant has become self-propelled through methane capture. So there's a lot of very adventurous technology that's being used in this particular site to make it sustainable, and again, wanting to be able to bring the public through artistic practice into a dialogue with those kinds of ideas of environment. And perhaps the last thing I'd say about it too is the sewage plant became a crucial site during the COVID epidemic in terms of being able to test for where certain strands of COVID were coming from in Melbourne and how our pandemic health policy would then respond and find a way to build some resilience against it. So the sewage plant has also become a site of high technology around microbiology and the like.
Yeah, so I mean it's a key part in, I guess, the digestive tract of Melbourne, which is now a city of 5.5 million, as we said. It takes 55% of the waste. When it started, it took 100% of Melbourne's waste. Now it's 55%. It's farmed out elsewhere. Important as well, though, is to recognise the way that we've brought community, I guess, into this project. So there was a displaced community that came out of Cockrock in the 1970s when technology improved to such a degree to make a lot of people actually redundant, and there was no need for them to actually work and live in that place. As a result, a large cyclone fence was put up alongside the freeway between the plant and Werribee, the city nearby, and people were not able to access a place that they'd called home, a place that was obviously important to them. So when we first went in, there were people that came in to see the work that were visiting these sites for the first time in 40 years. So we had people who had actually come in. One of the artists actually renovated the swimming pool, one of the old swimming pools that was originally built in the 1920s. Hadn't had anyone swim in it since 1973 when the town was disbanded. Catherine Bell renovated it, filled it so that it was sparkling, and left the adult pool in its dilapidated state. But we had a number of ex-residents from the town of Cockrock come in and tell us that they grew up swimming in that pool, that they had met their life partner in that pool. It was quite a sentimental journey for them. So as much as we are introducing them to important issues around the environment, sustainability and what happens to wastewater, there's these historical elements of the project that have been really key to what we do and our interest in people out there. So these were the first two iterations.
We probably haven't got time to explain
Yeah.
too much detail about the works, but we've got a little video we're going to show you that'll give you a bit of a sense of the scale and the context about the most recent project we did a few months ago this year.
Yeah, and so to just contextualise that a little more, as we've gone along, this project started with two partners, Wyndham City, who are the presiding council over Werribee, that city we've talked about, and Melbourne Water, who are the water authority across Melbourne, and from dams to wastewater infrastructure, that's what they're working with. They have been long-standing partners for us for 8 years now, but as we've gone along, we've managed to collect more along the way. So from the city now extending out, the third iteration of treatment actually drew on about 7 or 8 different partners, from local museums to other city councils to Westgate Neighbourhood Fund, which is part of the Westgate Tunnel project, which is a big freeway that's being built, Greening the Pipeline, which is a renewal project that's running out west. It allowed us to build up public and private partnerships and invest in the arts and the communities that kind of surround that old infrastructure that runs for 35 kilometres from Melbourne. So this was some of the work from the third iteration.
So what you're looking at here is an old pumping station built in the late 19th century, which is an incredible facility. It's now a museum. It still has all of the machines that were used in the 19th century on show that is still operational but not used. And we made a number of site responsive works here. This work that you can see is by a First Nations artist who used an engineering process to spray words from the local Bunurong Aboriginal group onto the wall, and then the words would dry and disappear. So it's very much about the idea of language that was lost. It was quite poetic work, but also quite a high-tech work. And this particular site was the beginning of it, and then we moved back to the Western Treatment Plant some 30 kilometres away. So we made a number of works all the way across. And we're going to show you a little film here. We might talk over the top of it, Cam, I think, to give you an idea of the scale of this site. This is a ceremony called Welcome to Country. The First Nations people do to welcome you onto their country. Been very focused on the idea of the bus as a conduit to experience the work because it's not easy to access the site. So a number of the projects, we move the audience through bus from place to place to be able to experience the work. This one we're looking at here is a very major documentary film, 32-minute film that was produced on the treatment plant that was screened outside among the sewage ponds. But this event here that you can see was the final event we had called Treatment Night and Day, which was a 24-hour non-stop series of performances and art interventions, where we talked about many aspects of the site to do with the gut, processes of the gut over 24 hours. We had a musical 24-hour non-stop. There are many, many different kind of responses to the site, but we were fascinated by the nocturnal history of this landscape as well, which before we hadn't been able to access. So this was great to be able to bring audiences in at night to experience the cycle of incredible ecology at night.
Before the audience entered the plant itself, they got a thorough clean, a bus clean, to ensure everything was hygienic.
I guess we'd say we're very interested in performativity as a curatorial strategy in public art, partly to be able to enable scale, or us to be able to hold the site. A site that's 90,000 hectares is an enormous space to try and inhabit art with. So many of the projects we commission have a strongly performative dimension, partly for that reason.
So out of the temporary stuff we've done, the feedback loop has been really positive, I think, and you can see it in the way that Melbourne Water has actually renovated that whole township of Cockerock, which is this space here. They've redesigned the garden area. They've renovated buildings in that site. They've made it into an education centre for people to explore the culture, the technology, and the science of the area.
So it's been an interesting journey also to build a kind of complex community engagement with the project. So on the one hand, we are fascinated and committed to building the local community engagement over a number of iterations, but we're also interested in bringing audiences from outside Werribee to engage with the project. So there's a kind of compound audience that we're fascinated by, of locals and people from outside that area. Maybe one last thing to say before we pass over is, I mentioned before the interest in the peri-urban, and part of that interest is actually political, in the sense that many of the communities that are living in the area we're making work have increasingly moved to a more populist political persuasion. And coming back to the referendum for First Nations people, that community voted against the referendum. So for us, we feel quite strongly the need to operate not in an urban context, but in a peri-urban context. And partly that is about trying to hold a space of complexity in communities that are increasingly susceptible to right-wing populism. And I think that is something that we feel, and particularly after what happened 6 weeks ago, we feel it even more strongly now. But our interest is in thinking through how complex aesthetics and performativities and temporary public practices may be able to hold open a space of complexity in communities that are struggling with their ability to access information in a complex way. Yeah. And I think we're out of time, so we might hold it there. Thank you very much.
thank you very much to David and Cameron for sharing your experience and your work together with local communities, with authorities, and to see how you work on shaping also like the work with the communities and in the context of Melbourne and not only. So thank you so much for joining us today. And you also brought displacement in the conversation. So yes. Thinking about that.
Yes, exactly. This is linking for the next topic that we have this afternoon. Thank you so much again.
Yes.
Our next topic is titled Addressing Displacements. So, migration and displacement of people are complex global phenomena that are currently shaping our cities and social fabric. Involuntary mass movement, driven by factors such as political conflicts, natural disasters, require rapid but also long-term responses from governments, international organizations, and local communities. Now, architecture and planning are integral to addressing the challenges posed by migration and displacement, but not only. So, cross-disciplinary collaboration with other institutions and entities is key. In this panel in particular, we're very happy to have with us a diverse group of actors working on this topic. So we're going to have Bonaventura and Leo from ACTA as architects presenting in this panel. We're going to have Sarah Williams, who's connected with us online and going to be bringing a lot of her research from MIT on this topic. We will be having from CISP, connected also online, Marco Labruna, the International Committee for the Development of the People from Niger. And last but not least, from the International Office of Migration from Rome, Flavio Di Giacomo. So we're very happy to have you with us. Please, I invite you all to take the seats. And we will be introducing the topics and then moderating questions later on. So yeah, thank you.
All right, so to launch this session, we would like to introduce Sarah Williams, who is going to share a presentation and introduce the different topics and approaches that we're going to have through the different presentations. Sarah Williams is an associate professor of technology and urban planning at the MIT, where she's also director of the Civic Data Design Lab and the Leventhal Center of Advanced Urbanism. Sarah combines her training in computation and design to create communication strategies that expose urban policies issues to broad audiences and create civic change. She calls the process data action, and before coming to the MIT, she was co-director of the Spatial Information Design Lab at Columbia University. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for being connected with us today.
I'm here. Sorry about that. Really excited to be here with you today. I wish I listed you all in person, but Alicia, thank you so much, and European Cultural Council, thank you so much for including me in this panel discussion, which is something very near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to share my screen. So as Lucia introduced me, I run something called the Civic Data Design Lab and also the Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism at MIT. The Leventhal Center is an interdisciplinary research center of architects, urban planners, designers, media artists, and really the idea is that through this interdisciplinary work, we can create innovation.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. If you like to share a presentation, we cannot see it now. Maybe there.
You can't see it. Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry. Good. No.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So. I myself am very interdisciplinary. I'm a geographer, an architect, an urban planner, and a data scientist. And I combine and mash up these skills to create communication strategies that can affect policy change. And it's something that I write about in my book called Data Action, Using Data for Public Good. So one of the things that I talk about in Data Action
up through, posting it online or allowing people to download it, but really sharing it through visualizations, because not everyone can access the information included in it. So I'm going to talk about a project that's in the European Cultural Council that you guys can also visit, I think, today. And this is a project that I worked on with the World Food Program, the Migration Policy Institute, the Civic Data Design Lab, with support from the IDB and the Organization of American States. And what we did, one of the things that I talk about too is that I think collaboration and building teams is really important. So this is a great team that we worked on, and we collected data from 5,000 households in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, discussing why they migrate, do they have migrants from the household? And really the idea of this study was to understand the complex dynamics that causing migration from Central America to the United States. We collected data and surveyed the households in regions where Central American migrants were being returned to the most. So when they come to the border of the US and they were being deported back, we surveyed those locations. And together we created a report from our survey data and analysis. And you guys are welcome to check out the report. But one of the things that we felt, or I felt very strongly, is that these kinds of reports that are standard of practice within the Migration Policy Institute, but in other organizations, are super rich and effective in understanding the dynamics of migration, but are not getting out to the publics that really need to take action with this information. So we were set to present this report and findings at a congressional hearing. And I asked the World Food Program if they could take a leap of faith and think about a different way to present our findings and data. So for 2021 congressional hearing, and we were still on Zoom at that time, we developed a website that people could explore while we were presenting to Congress. The website contextualized the issue of migration, looking at the causes over time. And we know that violence, climate change, and food insecurity are some of the biggest reasons that migrants migrate from Central America. And you can see that migration has risen exponentially in just the last decade. One of the findings in the report looked at the costs and the sheer financial burden that migrants take on. And can you believe that we found that migrants from Central America in just 1 year spent $2.2 billion to migrate from Central America to the United States. And this is equivalent to what most people spend on education in those countries. And, but migrants really are something that we depend on in the US. 73% of our US agricultural labor force are migrants. Yet we spend $2.9 billion to keep migrants out. So this is kind of contextualizing this and the total loss of money. And I think our partners really wanted to talk about where does that money go? Much of it goes into informal markets or kind of some of the reasons that people are migrating to begin with, some of the violence and insecurity. And only 57% of these migrants reside in their intended destination. And here we're trying to show the kind of sheer loss of that money. Only, close to half people make it. But, the countries in which migrants come from really benefit, and migrants send remittances home. And in some countries like El Salvador, 25% of their GDP comes from these remittances from the US. Financial insecurity drives migration, and we looked at the tapestry of motivations in which migrants, the reasons for migration. So from economics, unification, security, climate change. And you can see that blue is the biggest factor, and it's coming from all income levels, not just the poorest income level as was previously thought. And ultimately, we developed findings, and we recommended that one of our recommendations is that the United States create more legal pathways for Central American migrants. So if you think back to that statistic of 73% of our agricultural labor force is migrants, 93% of that are Mexican. So we need to kind of build in a labor force that's also an illegal labor force for Central American migrants. And that's exactly what 33 senators did after the congressional hearing in a letter to the Biden administration, citing our report and findings in their letter itself. Then just months after that, Biden advocated for more legal pathways to reduce illegal immigration, and he created an extended quota for Central American migrants. So that means that they can come in through legal visas to work. And after the hearing, I should say that we asked the people at the congressional hearing, the congressional aides, the congressmen themselves, what was it that caused them to write that letter? And they said, one of the things that they really liked about the visualization is that they felt like they could slice and dice the data and find their own insights in it. And while, that data was presented by us, it really allowed them to trust the information more by having the ability to interact with it. And this is how we take data to action: building expert teams, collecting the data uniquely, quantifying the results in unique ways, ground truthing those results with people that are in the data set, and then opening those data up through visualizations, and then reiterating on the project all along the way. But, after we created this kind of tapestry of motivations, and we're really able to affect change, we also wanted other ways to communicate the data, and we also really wanted the migrants to be involved. And so, taking this idea of a tapestry of motivations, we decided to work with migrants to create our own tapestry out of money. And just to step back, in Venezuela, when the Bolivarian became just devalued, people started to fold that money into wallets and purses. Here you can see them folding it, and taking this idea that migrants spend 2.2 billion from our study, we decided to create our own money that had information from the findings in our report. So here you can see 73% of hired crop workers were foreign-born, and that migrants spend 210 billion or made $210 billion for United States. And so each dollar represents one migrant and one motivation to migrate. And here we're looking at climate change. Financial insecurity was one of the biggest reasons that migrants left their home countries, and 65% of migrants were migrating with loans. Again, here the blue represents economic reasons to migrate. This really was looking at quality of life issues, showing that migrants on average only make $290 a month, and that for many migrants, it didn't feel like a choice to migrate. here we're looking at family reunification, and so this color represents that. And remittances, we found, just sustain life. So when we talk about remittances, we often think about the fact that people add rooms to their houses or add infrastructure, but actually, no, we found in our study that these were just putting food on the table, just putting shelter and clothes on children. And you can see here that 15% of Guatemala's GDP is remittances. This purple looks at security reasons for migration. The $53 million is lost in involuntarily returning migrants home. And migrants come with a lot of risk. So not just risk of being returned home, but risk to their security and to their personal well-being. Then we worked with Casa Tuchan, which is a shelter in Mexico City for Central American migrants. And together we designed a tapestry, and tapestries are very important to Central American culture. And here is the tapestry we made. You can see blue is the biggest reason for migration. This zigzagging looks at security. And then we have green also for climate change. And we put this tapestry up in the World Food Program headquarters in Rome during their executive board meeting. This is the head of the World Food Program, David Beasley, or the former head, the head when we were there, with the Panama ambassador. And what the tapestry was meant to do is create a conversation around migration in a time when people were distracted by other issues in the Ukraine, and we wanted to really help make sure that the conversation and urgency about migration was still on the table. And here is the exhibition, and you can see that each one of the dollars pieces of money represented one migrant, and you could tap it on the screen and see that migrant story here. As you and kind of see them in the data. And the idea here was to create empathy around the data visualizations. I think one of the things that was so impactful is that because it was at the executive board meeting, there were people from all over the world, and it really helped raise a lot of money and awareness for migrants. And so in the executive board meeting, donor states give money to the World Food Program for different causes. And but also one of the things that was great is even having kind of conversations. The Honduran ambassador, Venezuelan ambassador, we're actually talking about it. The Venezuelan ambassador is always kind of talking about how it's not her fault, but in this case, they were having a more conversation about why migrants migrate. They took the money, they had a conversation. So breaking those boundaries of the ways that in which we usually change policy, and I think art is a really important way to have those conversations. We had another study across that looked at migration through the Darien Gap. Can you believe that 42 different countries are migrating up through Central America, through Colombia, Panama, and eventually the US. And it was quite an incredible statistic from that data set. One of the things, and so ultimately we're in the European Culture Council upstairs, which you can check out the tapestry that was in the World Food Program, but also please take some money with you as you go. I want to talk really quickly about another project, as I know I don't have a lot of time, but one of the things I mentioned earlier in the data action principle, one was sharing data through visualization, but another one is building teams. And through the work that we did on the Central American migration, we have now really worked a lot with the World Food Program on different issues. And one of the reasons that they are interested in working with us is this idea of creating empathy for the cause, right? So we create reports and statistics, but how can we connect to the human dynamics of migration? So in this study that we just recently released, we looked at migrants on the move, and we are looking at the risks of West African migrants. And again, this was a partnership with the IOM, Mixed Migration Council, IFPRI, and the World Food Program. And we, again, worked with a typical report. We surveyed migrants that are in Libya, and in many of the detention centers in Libya, asking them about their pathway, what were the motivations and causes to migrate, and what are their hopes for the future. But in this study, we actually created a website where we looked at the survey respondents, and we had 26,000 migrant responses from an IOM displacement tracking matrix. And those flows that you see, we mapped them out. And then we wanted to pick just one migration pathway and really highlight the risks along that pathway. So here on the top of that, basically transect that we created, we tell the stories of migrants along that pathway, along their migration trail. And then at the bottom, you're seeing the data. And this data talks about the risks at that particular location. You can expand the data set and look at the risks all the way along. And we have looking at reported violence, conflict events, food insecurity, reliance on smugglers, remoteness. And in fact, you can play around with how much each one of these risks is weighted. And this is something that we worked on with our team, thinking about what are some of the biggest causes. We also wanted to show and describe, we had created the illustration on the top, but also give a way for people to look at qualitative data through images here on the bottom of that transect. So, ultimately, we hope to kind of put people in the pathway of migrants themselves. One of the things that, of the 621 immigrants in Libya in 2022, over 40% of them had their origins in West Africa. And migration routes were mapped from 26,000 migrant responses from the Organization of American, the IOM displacement tracking matrix and flow monitor data. And here you can see, again, what I just showed you, the case study. One thing that I don't have time to get into, but the quite detailed data analysis that you saw on that came up with a number of data sets that each one of them was hard to obtain and work with. So we had reported violence, conflict events, food insecurity data, a reliance on smugglers and remoteness and heat exposure, at all the kinds of risks affecting migrants. And here's some images of what these are. Many migrants in transit become vulnerable as they cross the Sahara Desert, and they are very reliant on smugglers, which puts them at severe vulnerable positions. Some are often left dead in the Sahara Desert. And migrants rely on these smugglers to cross areas, but a lot of times the smugglers don't tell them that, in fact, in West African countries, there's an ECOWAS visa, which allows migrants to travel across the borders, but smugglers tell them that they don't. So they instantly become much more vulnerable also to the heat and extreme weather, and the lack of food along their passage. And when migrants, get to Libya, they also face really horrible conditions. Many of them are detained in detention centers such as this. So these data sets were then combined to create this transect and risks that we saw. The World Food Program has again used this to help with garnering support. But the idea was not to say what we should do about migration, but to create empathy along the route. And what the World Food Program wants to do is help to just sustain the life of people in that migration route. So they're not advocating necessarily for different kinds of migrants, but that's the end of that study. And just to leave you with one last study that we're working on right now, it's called Vida Migrante. And this is a study that we...
Responsive works here. This work that you can see is by a First Nations artist
who
used an
something
engineering
going on.
process to spray words from the local...
Is there a recording going on?
Aboriginal group onto the wall, and then the words would dry and disappear. So it's very much
do other people hear that
was lost. It was
voice?
work, but also quite a high-tech work. And this particular site was the beginning of it, and then we moved back to the West Australian plant, some 30 kilometers away. So we made a number of works all the way across. And we're going to show you a little film here. We might talk over the top of it, Cam, I think.
Should I just stop?
The scale of this site. Artist.
Is there another presentation going on? I'm a little confused. Oh, so you guys weren't hearing that, but I was hearing another presentation in the background. That was not my voice, or wasn't about the presentation. Okay. Yeah, I was just a little confused there for a second. Sorry, guys. But so this new study that somebody else was narrating another project on top of. Oh, weird. Oh, that's so weird. I don't know what's going on. Well, we'll just finish there. And I'm not sure why that sound is coming up, but. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened with the...
I don't know what that was about, but we'll just stop.
With the last part. But yeah, we'd be keen maybe to hear more about that project in the panel discussion if you're going to join us. Yeah, but I just wanted to just give a very quick feedback is that, these numbers that you showed are shocking. And it's crazy to think about, and it's scary actually that you managed to collect all of these data in that part of the world, right? But what is happening in other places and not being documented and not being collecting all of these data. I hope within this panel conversation we can get to touch on that point to see what is happening in other places and other locations. And you mentioned a lot of IOM. So now we have Flavio Di Giacomo with us from IOM Rome. He's the spokesperson, the Senior Public Information Associate, and the Coordination Officer in the Coordination Office for the Mediterranean Rome. He develops communication strategies, coordinates communication and awareness, raising campaigns with a specific focus on migration flows in the Mediterranean and Africa, and on integration policies in Italy and in Europe. So we're going to be moving to another part of the world. Flavio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all and for having invited me to this very interesting event. I have a presentation which is a little bit less cool than the one before. I have to apologize. I was impressed by all these effects, so it's not like that. It's all styles, a lot of words. So, and but yeah, I am Flavio Di Giacomo. I'm spokesperson, so I work mainly with the media, journalists, and the communication-related strategies, activities, etc. for the IOM. IOM is the International Organization for Migration, which is part of the United Nations system since 2016. We actually were founded in 1951 after the end of World War II, and Italy was one of the founding countries, and our HQ is in Geneva, just to present what we are. And here in Rome, we have the office, the coordination office for the Mediterranean. And this is the island of Lampedusa. This is a picture that I took some time ago. I've been working for this organization for the last almost 17 years, so a lot of time actually. And I've seen a lot of things in these years. I will talk about a little bit what is migration and the complexity of migration, because migration is not a simple issue, it's quite complex. And well, I'm gonna talk about it. And so it's not work. Okay. Yep. Okay, now the yellow one, yeah. So a few numbers just to start. How many migrants are in the world? Well, it is not a very specific number. Some organizations provide different numbers. It's not easy. More or less, we are talking about 281 million international migrants in the world in 2020. It's 3.6% of the entire world global population. And it's a number on the rise, of course. But it's also true that the population of the world has grown a lot in the last years. There are not only international migrants, but when talking about migration, we also have to consider there are internal migrants. Internal migrants are more or less 740 million. So there is another part which is not very popular like international migrants, but a lot of migrants are actually moving inside their countries, which was the case for Italy, for example, back in the years when people from southern Italy went to work in northern Italy. So the same situation happens in all countries in the world. And it's very difficult also to understand the complexity and to explain the complexity of internal movements, because as you can see here, how far should a person be mobilized to be considered an internal migrant, how much time should they spend in the new residence, etc. So all these categories are very complicated. We use categories, but sometimes they are not very, very precise, because it is impossible to have them so precise. So there are also the IDPs, people, forced migrants who have to move inside the country of residence. And there are a lot of IDPs in Asia or also in African countries. And we are talking about more or less 71 million IDPs in the world, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, everywhere. So people who are actually fleeing from their country of residence, for their place of residence, but they are not leaving the country. The same thing happened last year in Ukraine during the war. A lot of Ukrainians fled from their hometown, but they stayed in Ukraine. We're talking about what happened last year in, well, these are representation. It's very important. In Pakistan last year, there were a lot of emergency due to the floods. 8 million people moved from their home countries but stayed in Pakistan. Of course, sometimes first you're an IDP, then after a few months or a few years you become international migrants. If the situation in your home country is not getting better, at the end you can then move. We are expecting, of course, the arrival of more Pakistanis in the future because of this crisis which happened last year. And Pakistanis are actually arriving now in Italy through the Balkan route, also through Libya. So it's all linked and complex, as I was saying. And we also think that there are a lot of, we are talking about big crises. Climate change is one of the big crises of this century. And there will be an increase of numbers of climate migrants. According to IOM and the World Bank and other organizations, we may have the number of 260 million people who are going to migrate because of climate change in the next 25 years, 27 years. This is a very, very worrying number. There are entire part of the world from the 27th to the 40th parallel which are actually overpopulated, and these parts of the world, many of these parts of the world probably will be inhabitable for in the next 30 years. So people will move to the north. This is a matter of fact. And they will come to the north, which is an area of the world which is experiencing a demographic crisis. So, as you can see, also this tragedy can become, if we look at long-term strategy, a solution for our demographic crisis. But we are going to talk about that. So these are the numbers of the numbers and the projected internal climate number of climate migrants by 2015. Of course, we cannot be sure about the numbers, so there are different projections. Of course, climate migrants, first of all, there are a lot of internal climate migrants inside their own countries, and then inside their own continents. So, if you want, I think that this presentation can be shared with participants once, if they're interested in checking better this old-style PowerPoint, of course. And this is the perception of migration that we have here in Italy, but in Europe. I'm going to talk a lot about Italy because I've been working in this country for years, but what happens here in Italy is what happens in Europe, and in general, I would say what happens in the Western world. Migration is a complex phenomenon. I'm working with the media, and I have to say that it's very complicated for me and for all communication professionals to explain the complexity in a media context which tends to simplify the narrative. So complexity is not considered sexy by the media. We need a simple narrative with simple solutions. We need black and white positions. So explaining complexity is the real challenge for all of us who are working with the media and all communication professionals. And it's a challenge that for the moment we are losing, I have to say, because it's quite complicated, especially now that there are with the social media, the narrative is becoming even more simplified and short, and it's very hard to explain complexity. So this is the perception of migration that we have here in Italy and Europe. It means that there is an invasion arriving. People and boats are coming to Italy to invade our continent and our country. And okay, but again, we were talking about data. Numbers are very important, so we should first of all look at the numbers. This year we had registered the arrivals in Italy. Everybody probably read the newspapers and the media talking about the migration crisis in Lampedusa this year, with the arrival of 150,000 migrants so far last week in Italy. This number looks like a huge number, but it is not. As you can see here, this number is just the 0.3% of the Italian population and the 0.07% of the total of the European population. In Italy, we are 60 million people. In Europe, we are 450 million people. So this is not an emergency in terms of numbers. In 2015, there were, we have recorded the arrival of almost 1 million people coming from Turkey to Greece, mainly Syrians. And almost 1 million is not comparable with 150 million people. And last year, in Europe, we have recorded the arrival, for a moment, so some people can get back, but of 8 million Ukrainians from Ukraine to Europe. And I remember that in just 3 months, from March to June 2022, Italy registered the arrival of 130,000 Ukrainians in 3 months. And nobody said that there was an emergency in terms of invasion of migrants. So again, perception, narrative, but actually, it is very powerful, because what was not an emergency last year became an emergency this year, with different flows, different people, different, of course, more dramatic way of crossing the borders, because arriving by sea means that you're risking your life. People die, there are shipwrecks. People arrive from a different continent, etc. So the perception is different, but the numbers are less. So we have to also take in consideration what is the perception of this. I will never be able to read it, of course, because it's too small. Yeah, Yeah. Okay, but of course this is what I wrote, so I know it because this is. I'm not used to PowerPoint's presentation. That's I usually speak. So I was talking about the fact that in Greece there were so many arrivals a few years ago, and now in this moment migrants are arriving in Italy by sea. They're arriving because of the difficult context that migrants are experiencing in North Africa, especially in Libya and in Tunisia. So migrants are leaving Libya and Tunisia. In Tunisia, for example, we have the arrivals, we are recorded the arrivals, you will see in the next PowerPoint presentation, in the next slide. We have registered the arrival of 90,000 migrants from Tunisia and 43,000 migrants from Libya. And this is because last year, the economic crisis in Tunisia led to a moment of discrimination, racial discrimination against migrants who were living in Tunisia. So we have seen that many migrants, sub-Saharan migrants who have been living for years in Tunisia, were forced to leave the countries because there was a hunt to black people. And we are meaning not only sub-Saharan migrants, but also black Tunisians, black European, black French, etc. So I personally met a lot of migrants in Lampedusa who were coming from Tunisia, who told me that they have been living for 3, 4, 5 years in Tunisia. Tunisia is a destination country for many nationalities, especially people coming from Ivory Coast in Guinea, because they can go from these countries to Tunisia without a visa. These are visa-free procedure to get from these countries to Tunisia. So Tunisia is a destination country. And these migrants became victims of abuses, and they were robbed, they were assaulted, and they could even walk in the street anymore. Especially after, in February of last year, the president said that African migrants should leave the country because they were a risk for the Tunisian identity, let's say. So there was this moment of violence, and people started to leave Tunisia in very difficult situation, with boats which were very, very fragile and unseaworthy. For the first time, we have seen these small iron boats, which used to break after a few hours of navigation. It means that after 15, 20 hours, these boats tend to break in two, and people fall. And we have registered this year 2,100 deaths in the central Mediterranean route. Probably numbers are much higher because there are a lot of shipwrecks who are unreported because these people died before no one knowing that. And we know that I spoke with rescuers in Lampedusa. They told me that they found a lot of bodies in the water. It means that there are a lot of shipwrecks that nobody heard anything about. So the situation is quite dramatic. Same thing for Libya. Libya has always been the first departure country in the last few years, 10 years, because Libya, it was historically a destination country for migrants, but the situation in the country is very difficult. So many times, because, again, of racial discrimination, migrants in Libya become victims of violence, abuses, torture, human rights violations, rape, and they are forced to leave the country. And so there are a lot of migrants leaving Libya because they became victims of these human rights violations. So we also have to understand that we are always talking about the difference between refugees and migrants. Refugees are those people who are actually fleeing from wars and persecution and regimes from their own country, from the country of origin. But for the case of Italy, a lot of migrants arriving to Italy are migrants who probably at the beginning they were considered economic migrants. And again, we're talking about West Africa, especially those coming from West Africa do not have a very clear migration plan. Many of them didn't even want to come to Italy, but they want to go to Libya or somewhere else. And then once in Libya they become victims of human rights violations, vulnerable migrants, and they were forced to flee. But they will never get the refugee status because they are not fleeing from the countries of origin, but their country of destination/transit. So this is the situation. And we are talking about countries of destination. This is something that in our Eurocentric view of the world, nobody talks about. The fact that migration is something which is, especially in Africa, in Asia, I guess also in South America, and even if I don't work with South America, but Asian and Africa, migration is an internal phenomenon. It means that 85% of African migration flows stays in Africa. They are not coming to Europe. Just 15% of African migration flows comes to Europe. So again, the European idea, politics, media, all Africans are coming to Europe. No, this is not true. They just move, people move, and usually try to move to border countries, which is normal. The same things happens in Europe. There are a lot of countries like, well, Libya has more or less, we have recorded almost 1 million, a little bit less, migrants living in Libya right now. In Turkey, there are almost 4 million of refugees. In Lebanon, there are almost 2 million refugees now, I think. So there are many more migrants and refugees residing in countries which are not Europe. So they are hosting more countries, more migrants, sorry, than the migrants hosted by Europe. But Europe feels in danger, feels invaded, etc. This is just perception. This is very important to say because we have victims of a Eurocentric point of view, which is supported by media and politicians. So let's see if I am able to read. Yeah, this is what I said before. And because nobody talks about it. When we are talking about migrants' arrivals by sea, everybody say we need Africa to be more developed. Actually, these people coming, they were living in Africa, but they were fleeing. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them were fleeing because they were living somewhere else. They were forced to flee. So this is really the migration crisis of these last couple of years is mainly, even more for Libya, is mainly caused by the fact that it's impossible to live in these northern African countries. Again, there is a complexity of these migration flows. Everybody has his own migration plan or develops his own migration plans during the way. So there are those who actually live in their countries because they need to feed their families and they try to go somewhere else, not very far from home. Those who actually are escaping because they are victims of some kind of discrimination in their home countries. Those who actually wanted to come to Europe because they think that they wanted to find a dream and to look for a better life in a continent that they perceive as rich. Sorry, I was sick until yesterday, so. Talking is not very easy. Just a moment. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I was taking some notes before because there was some things that I wanted to be. I read in the former presentation that migration is a risk. I do not agree, because migration is not a risk. Irregular migration is a risk. Migration is not a risk per se. Migration is not a choice. Again, not true. A lot of time migration is a choice. Irregular migration is a forced choice because you don't have any other alternatives. So the world is on the move. The world is moving. The conditions the people live, it makes the difference. And the way they arrive. For example, here in Europe, we have this dramatic situation where migrants arrive on these unseaworthy boats, they die at sea, and before that, they are victims of human rights violations in Libya, and now also in Tunisia, but especially in Libya. These are a picture of an arrival of people coming from Libya I took last month when I was in Lampedusa. We have registered an increase of migrants arriving from Libya in October, especially Pakistanis and Syrians. That's very interesting as well, because we haven't seen Syrians for quite a long time, and now there are Syrian families, a lot of medical cases arriving to Lampedusa. And this was the numbers I was talking to you about before, the number of departure of people arrived in Italy this year, especially Tunisia and Libya. Until last year was the opposite. Libya was the first departure country, and Tunisia the second. The difference is that until last year, only Tunisians used to leave Tunisia to come to Italy. Now, we are talking about sub-Saharan migrants coming from Tunisia. I stop for a while. It's a bit more complicated than what I thought. Yes, I recovered. These are the numbers of people died at sea in the last 10 years. Starting from 2014, IOM started to count the deaths at sea, and the deaths in the world actually. The Mediterranean is the deadliest part of the world for migrants. I remember in 2013 there was a big shipwreck in Lampedusa. 368 people died. All politicians from Italy and Europe came to Lampedusa and said never again. After 10 years, we have registered 28,000 deaths. So this never again didn't happen. And so politics failed, but I have to say that also we failed, because apparently we have been working a lot to say no more shipwrecks, changing the narrative of migration, etc. Nobody heard us. So we have also to change our way to communicate this topic, because what we are doing now is not working. So we are trying to reshape the narrative. But it's also true that migration actually, thank you very much. Grazie mille. Saving my life. Thank you. Well, this is nice breaker as well, so it's okay. This works. And these are the iron boats I was talking to you about. On this boat, this boat, 35, 40 migrants can stay on this boat, but you can see that they are really built in 3 hours and provided to the migrants. Again, on these iron boats, all the sub-Saharan migrants live. Tunisian migrants use wooden boats, which are a little bit more stronger. They are safer, but again, discrimination, another discrimination, black migrants are forced to use these boats. Urban migrants can use better boats. It has always been the case. Even a few years ago, Syrians could buy life jackets, black migrants couldn't. So there are a lot of discrimination happening in departure points, let's say in North Africa. But again, I changed totally. We have been talking about irregular migration, which is a small part of migration, and it's an increasing part, I have to say. And migration is a risk. We were talking, and migration is a risk. And why it is a risk? Because there are no legal pathways, or there are just a few legal pathways. In the last 20 years, 15 years, Europe closed itself, and I think the Western world closed itself to migration. So there are no other ways to come, if not with family reunification, some kind of humanitarian corridors, but in general, it's very complicated to come to Europe legally. So you are forced to put your life in the hands of smugglers, unscrupulous smugglers that really don't care about the life of migrants, that we have seen. But it's not the fault of smugglers. The smugglers are created by policies, the policies that block migrants at the borders. But when we are talking about migration, when media talk about migration, they just talk about irregular migration, about arrivals by boats, etc. As I told you, 150,000 migrants arrived this year, and a little bit less the last 2-3 years, the same numbers in 2015, 2016. The big difference, for example, we have been talking about Lampedusa a lot this year, but why people arrived in Lampedusa? Because in 2016, migrants were saved at sea and brought to the big Sicilian ports, Catania, Augusta, Messina, etc., which are big, were not brought to Lampedusa, which is small. Now migrants are not saved at sea as they were in 2016 because the system, the patronage system is not the same in the Mediterranean, unfortunately. So migrants arrive by themselves in Lampedusa, especially this year because living from Tunisia is even closer. So they arrive in Lampedusa. So we have recorded the same numbers of arrivals more or less in 2016, but at the time only 8% arrived in Lampedusa. The rest were saved and brought to Sicily. This year, 70% arrived in Lampedusa. So this is not an emergency for Italy. It was just an emergency for Lampedusa. But it was sold by the media and told by the media as an emergency for Europe, while it was just an emergency of Lampedusa. But the perception was there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people at the pier in Lampedusa. Of course, it's a small island, 5,000 inhabitants. But these numbers would be, wasn't the same numbers as 5 years ago. But the perception was that there was an invasion of migrants to Italy. But again, when media talk about migration, they just talk about arrivals by sea. Migration is much more. In Italy, there are 5 million regular migrants living in the country, and they are contributing to the 9% of the local GDP, for example. I don't know how much time do I have. Not a lot, 5 minutes, okay. Yeah. Remittances. So, migration is necessary for it's necessary for the world economy, it's necessary for Europe, it's necessary for the countries of origin. Migrants send back remittances to their home countries, as it has always been the case. We have the numbers, almost 800 billion remittances last year. India, China, Mexico, Egypt, Nigeria, you'll see the numbers. These are very important because migrants send back money to their home countries, and many of the local GDPs were, of course, as it was for Italy back in the years, they rely on the remittances of migrants. But again, local GDP here in Italy and in Europe, in general, at international level, migrants contribute to 10% of global GDP, which is enormous. But in Italy, as I was telling you, 5 million regular migrants contribute to 9% of the Italian GDP. This is very, very big. Nobody talks about it. If all migrants decide to leave the country tomorrow morning, Italy would be like a country who have lost a world war. So this is totally necessary. Last year, migrants paid 29.2 billion euros in taxes in Italy and contributions. Italy spent and provided to migrants 27.4 billion in services, health services, etc. But in this 27 billion, it are also included all the expenses for assistance and lending points, etc., integration policies, etc. So, nevertheless, 5 million migrants, they provide 1.8 billion of positive balance to the state budget every year. So when they say we cannot, we don't have enough money for migrants, it is not true. We are getting a lot of money from migration. And again, looking at the future, this is the most worrying part probably. And this is why migration is necessary and is a positive phenomenon. We should just think about the fact that migration is not only a humanitarian phenomenon, it's the most important, one of the most important geopolitical phenomena of this century. So we need to carry out humanitarian policies for those who need protection and assistance, but you also have to manage the phenomenon from a political point of view and economic point of view. The demographic crisis, this is very hard, of course, but we have experiencing here in Europe, this is for Italy, but it's also for Europe. Italy is not, okay, the worst country in that case, like Japan, for example. We are getting old, terribly old. And as you can see, 34.5% of the Italian population will be 65 years old. There will be a decrease by 2050 of 20% of people at working age in Italy. There will be an increase of people retired. According to ISTAT, by 2015, Italians should be 54 million, maybe even less sometimes. The statistic and the numbers change. But out of this 54 million, 1 in 3 will be retired. And the ratio between people working and people retired now is 3 to 1, and it will come 1 to 1 in 2050. It means that we will have a huge socioeconomic crisis in the next 25 years, which is there because it is not possible to survive in a society where there is a ratio 1 to 1, 1 people working, 1 people retired. This is not possible. This is simply not possible. So it is very important to understand that migration is part of the solution. It is there. These statistics are for the moment irreversible. If we want to invert this trend, all Italian women starting from tomorrow, Saturday, should have 3 kids, which is not possible, of course. So we need to implement a lot of policies from a demographic point of view, help families invest on jobs, etc. But for the moment, migration is a solution, because without migrants, we will not be able to be a developed country anymore, where we'll have a huge crisis in Italy and in Europe. And the demographic crisis is one of the major crises that we'll have to face in the next future. Nobody's talking about that. We're all talking about, rightly so, climate crisis, but nobody's talking about demographic crisis. In Japan, they are starting to talk about it in order to implement policies that could help them a little bit to stop the decrease of population. It's going to be hard. There is not a simple solution, but we have to face this situation. So closing borders, say we don't need migrants, and making life difficult for people who are having here, stopping the integration policies, etc., is just propaganda. But it is a totally short-sighted approach toward a phenomenon which is a geopolitical phenomenon that needs to be balanced, managed in a balanced way. So we need migrants, and we need to change the policies toward migration. We don't need, well, politics lives in an eternal present. We always say see the next 3 months, 4 months. Every politician looks at the next general elections, but a politician should look at not at this generation, but the next generation, should look at the next 15 years, 20 years. So we need this kind of politicians, of course. We need this kind of approach, because we need to manage migration with long-term policies that can look at the next 20 years. I'm trying to not to die, but I will not be there in 2050, probably, if I go down there. But no, it's very important to change the approach, and so to change the narrative, because we are always talking about migration as a problem. Migration is a solution. Migration is a resource. The problem is the way migration is managed. And then, of course, there are the crises, there are the floods, there are the regimes, there are the persecutions, and this is a part. But migration as a whole is a huge resource. People is on the move. Also, the fact that climate migrants will come here. I mean, from the start of human history, migration and the fact that the people move has saved humanity, probably. So it is changing. Migration is there, and is here to stay. I mean, so in the next 20 years, probably we are going to go to Africa and beg people to come here to work, as a matter of fact. Of course, we will have a different world. Yesterday I was at IBM at a conference there, I spoke there, and they were talking about artificial intelligence all the time. So I don't know, again, what will happen with artificial intelligence in a job context. It's quite complicated to understand, but as far as we know, for the moment, without migration we will not survive. So we need migration to survive, and we need migration to be well managed with long-term policies. Healthy. Okay, I will survive.
Flavio, thank you so much. This has been a very impactful presentation, I have to say. I'm not sure about how you guys are feeling, but I really trying to absorb all these numbers, all these data, between your presentation and Sarah's presentation. This is really alarming, I have to say. And with that, I want to see what architects have to say in that perspective, right? So how do architects work in such contexts? I will introduce our next two speakers. Bonaventura, Visconti di Modrone. He considers architecture as a problem-solving tool and has been working in the humanitarian field since 2016. He has a deep interest in sustainability, and having worked with NGOs and UN agencies in various contexts, he founded ACTA Architects in 2016 and has since then worked on various projects, including a regenerative algorithm to design settlements in Niger for UNHCR, innovative education facilities in Niger as well, a new typology of community spaces for refugee camps in Greece with the IOM, and a safe space for women who have experienced gender-based violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I will also introduce our second speaker because they have a joint presentation together. Our second, third, fourth speaker, Leo Bettini, Oberkalmsteiner, sorry if I pronounce it, yeah? So after collaborating with ACTA since 2016, Leo is now the co-founder and the head of ACTA Zurich. His focus on this is the development and design of a humanitarian and sustainable architecture projects. Among several publications, he co-founded the magazine Plant Phase in 2012 in Munich, and the periodical titled Superposition 2020 in Zurich. And since 2021, he's working as a lecturer at the chair of Professor Andrea de Platzes at the ETH in Zurich. Now, without further ado, I give you the floor for both of you for your presentation. And yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for the presentation, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting us and for coming today. And yes, as you just said, we founded ACTA, which means Actions Through Architecture, because we believe that architecture has the power to impact the quality of life of people living crisis, migration in the traumatic way, and other issues. So we created this company in 2016, and we focus on humanitarian architecture with a sustainable touch. We tried every time that we build something to come up with different solutions that lower the prices of the buildings, to make it affordable to NGOs and to international organizations, because we really think that we can do good architecture even with a very low budget, and we think that good architecture can have a big impact on people living in different crises. So we will show you 4 projects related on migration and specifically on with refugees, IDPs, which means internal displaced people, as Mr. Giacomo just said, climatic and economical migrants. So we will start with the first project, which is the Maidan Tent, which is a community space that we designed with the help of the OEM in Greece in a temporary transitional center. And voilà, now you will see that this is a drawing that we received from now a friend, Syrian artist, who wanted to express and show his journey, let's call it like that, from Syria to Europe. And he got stuck, as many other people, in Greece, because the number of people that wanted to cross the border between Turkey and then Europe was quite big at that moment, and Europe reacted closing the gate. So lots of people got stuck in Greece, mainly on the islands, and then some of them now, lots of them have been moved to mainland, but at that time, the vast majority of the people was living in Lesbos and other islands, and just some of them made it to the mainland. And we visited one of those transitional camps at the very beginning when it was opened, Now the situation changed a lot, but back in the days, we went there and we saw that one of the major things that was lacking in the camp, this is just one portion of the camp, you see those ISO boxes, those are like containers that has air conditioning, they have electricity, and they have even some of them, they have satellite TVs. We went there and we saw that people were lacking a community space. Actually, there was one back in the days, and that was a WFP container tent, storage tent, sorry. And that was huge, but then it was damaged, and it wasn't designed for human beings. It was designed to store food. WFP, that's what they do. And then we thought what we can do as architects, how can we improve the situation, how can we help the community, and we came up with this tent, which is specifically designed for human needs. As you can see, it's subdivided in 8 sectors and has 8 openings, of course. No, sorry.
Yeah, maybe at this point we go back very quickly to the overall scenario at that time. I mean, for us it seemed yesterday, but it was actually 2015 that we started working on this project, that we started going into the theme of migration. And it was the time where I remember still the words of Merkel back in the days, "Wir schaffen das," so we will make it. So it was like, as we just heard, it was like this big cloud going up, bursting up of the migration crisis. And we thought, okay, we have to do something about this because we just dropped out of university and we were like, yes, but you know, architecture is exactly the place where people meet, where people gather, where people actually share common ground and share like their interact, you know, where people in this case, in this specific case of migration, also sometimes regain their identity. So we kind of, and you see it very well in this path. It's not a linear path that you see there, but it's like, it's going basically back and forward. And in this path, it's a little bit comparable to the path we made, like from a intellectual point of view in designing this project of the Maidan tent, in designing this common ground, but also the path that we didn't do alone. So we're just like, we're 2 of us sitting here, but actually there is a whole background of people that helped us developing this project. And we're talking about sociologists, philosophists, psychologists, and so on and so forth. So the project developed over 2 years, but it was actually a huge community engagement project because we didn't know, you know, we came from the university and we really didn't know very much about migration, and we didn't know very much about people and how people would behave when they were forced to be placed all together in one settlement. So and now we can maybe go back to the project, to the tent itself, which is actually, as you can see here, from an architectonic point of view, what this project is missing is a facade. Usually what the project does in architecture, you have the facade, so you have the skin of the building, and then you have a roof on top. And we thought we leave away the skin of the building because the skin of the building is the one element that shows the identity of something. But the identity here of this project should be actually only the entrance gate. So it's just a roof placed on the ground that says 8 times you're welcome to come in, and it doesn't have a hierarchy. It doesn't orient itself somewhere, but it orients itself everywhere. And that's why also the shape comes from, like basically this round shape, the center shape, where everybody could come into the center and feel again interaction with other people and feel again basically a point of arrival. As you saw before this map, you know, you arrive at a point, but then you have to go forward, and then you don't know if you really arrived at that place or not. So we kind of wanted to create something where you really feel, you know, a common ground in which finally, you know, you can express and interact with other people.
Yeah, exactly. And when we design it in this way, so you can use it differently. In here we're just showing a couple of examples of how you can use it, but yeah, the idea of having 8 sectors that are exactly the same size and the same shape allows you to use them differently as you want. So let's see, this was also, I think it's worthy to mention the fact that it's called Maidan tent because in Arabic, Maidan means square. So we wanted to create the square inside the camp. So here you can see that that's Arizona temporary camp. And you see we place it exactly in the middle. So everybody could reach it very, very easily. And voila, here you see it in the middle of the camp. And this is the space. The poles are there to allow people to use it differently. I mean, if you separate it, you see those blue curtains allow you to separate the space. This is a community meeting with the OEM people and the UNHCR. And you see, you can fit a lot of people at the same time, and this was very appreciated. The space, covered space, especially in Greece, where during summertime it's super, super hot, and having those openings allows the fresh air to pass. And you will see here, for example, this, I was very happy. I was there. He unfortunately couldn't come, but this was during Eid. And Eid, it's a super important holiday for Muslims. And we spoke with all the refugees, and they were super sad just before the arrival of the tent, because they said, we don't have the space where to celebrate our weddings, our birthdays, our holidays. And then when we installed the tent, suddenly the people decided to come into the space. And finally, after 1 year, they could organize their Eid, and were super, super happy. And that, at least, made us very proud, because it meant that what we had in mind and the discussions we had with, like, all the psychologists, all the colleagues, and also the OEM people, were fine, actually. People decided to use their space. We didn't force them to use it. Actually, it took them a couple of weeks to start using it, because I remember that the early adopters, I don't have a picture here, were like 7 old Syrians who moved from their isobox. One day they moved from their isobox closer to the tent under a tree. They were placing chests. Then the next day they moved even closer, and then the third day they were inside. And that day was a huge achievement, because we got the early adopters, and they were like 70 years old, so not the usual early adopters, but we made it. When I saw that, I thought, okay, it's done. And then in a couple of months, you can see that they were using it for the Eid celebration.
Yeah, maybe this picture shows also like the end point, of action through architecture. So what we did, we didn't just plan the tent, in our office, in a warm space, in a safe space, and then we just build it there. But we kind of engaged it, we shaped it together with the community on site, and we built it with the community on site. So the two of us, we went there and we raised up this 200 square meter, large or small, depends on how you see it, tent, in order then to kind of, engage not only from a point of view, yes, we use the tent while it's done, like we use the architecture as the function that it should have, but we also use the architecture as a process to build something together. And this process of building something together, that's the point where, the refugee, or like the people who came there, which unfortunately, yeah, we call them refugees, but, the people who came there, they find doing that a new identity, they were like very happy to do that. All of a sudden they had a purpose, and the purpose was shown then at the end of their journey, for example, to one of these events where they all came together.
Yeah, I'm very happy about that. So unfortunately we have to run.
Yeah, we skipped the technical data, I think.
Yeah. So that was a project related to people stuck in a place, waiting for their documents to arrive. Actually, when they arrive in the camp, they had to wait even years to get their final, let's say, green light from one of the Europe countries for resettlement. So in this case, we worked in Niger, and we have been called to kind of rethink an existing new settlement plan that was designed previously by local architects in Niger with CISP and UNHCR. So the given grid was already there, and Niger, it's quite important to say this, Niger was one of the only countries that decided to accept refugees and say, okay guys, stay here, we will take care of some of you. We have a lot of land. Niger, it's immense, it's 4 times France. We have to say that mostly it's desert, but it's quite big. And the population, it's small, so there is plenty of land. And the government accepted of creating those lotissements, new settlements for refugees and IDPs, because Niger borders with Nigeria, and in the Lake Chad region, terrorists are attacking villages, so people from Nigeria are fleeing to Niger, and people from Niger are moving from those villages to somewhere else, so internal IDPs, as we said before. So we have been called to try to make the existing grid, let's say more user-friendly somehow. So you will see, the idea came at the beginning, and it was something taught by CISP and UNHCR. The idea was to mix the functions. You see that we had the blue, yellow, and orange plots, and the yellow were for the previous landlords, orange are the municipality, and the yellow, and the blue are the refugees. So we decided to mix all of them in order not to create ghettos, so like that zone on the top, it's all blue because we want to stock the refugees over there, and then we separate yellow and orange. No, the idea was to create something more friendly, so where people could finally exchange with others and create a real community. So I have to run. So this is example. For example, we studied how we could rearrange the space inside the plots. You see that we studied the local culture, and we saw that, for example, people wanted to have the house, then the veranda in front of the house, then a little space empty as a courtyard, or maybe like a little garden, and very, very important, they wanted to have a private space between their house and the street where invite people in. So people in Niger, they don't invite you to come to your house. They want to have a proper space where you stay together with foreigners. And here we studied also the different opportunities, and we wanted to, in order to create some more resilience, we asked people, where were you before becoming a refugee or becoming an IDP? Instead of just sitting there receiving food and money from international organizations, why don't you try to reclaim your previous profession? So we came up with this like 3 basic layouts. And also we studied how to rearrange, because the given grid was already there, so we had to study how to mix the different plots together. And voila, you see that's the individual plot, but we had to study how to place it in that 4 units. So for example, in order not to break households, we merged together the plots, and that's one big giant plot for one family, and that's the version for 4 different people who has nothing to do one to the other, so they still have their own privacy. And how to place it inside the stecca?
Yeah, the grid.
Yeah, okay, yeah, the grid. So,
but also here, like the main issue was to create diversity. So, like the main goal of this urban carpet, you could say, of this tessuto urbano, we would call it in Italy, of this pattern, is actually like to break the rigidity, like of splitting up people, you know, like splitting them up into genders, into backgrounds of any kind of sort, nations and whatever, but kind of trying to mix up as much as we could the urban grid in order to create also internally in this small or big, you know, it depends again how you see it, you know, diversity. And within these grids, you can see it here, like you can have public functions or you can have the private functions. And depending on how the municipality decides to do it, or the private landlord decides to do it, or the refugee decides to do it, you could break up like this succession that you have sometimes nowadays in the cities, you know, where everything looks exactly the same, or you have like you have it actually on the outskirts of the city where everything looks the same. And we know this phenomena from Dubai, for example, you know, where you have like exactly same identical roads, and you have to search people by the numbers, you know. And if you are inside of these new cities that grow up in 5-10 years out of nothing, you kind of get completely lost. And again, here, doing that, you know, tries to give to this place a certain identity, which then is shaped by an individual choice.
Exactly. So, for example, the idea is to have 7,000 people living in the same area suddenly, one day from the other. So how do you coexist in the same space if you just have your plot as a chicken box? It's never going to work. So the idea of having this settlement as a mixed-use settlement, I think it's quite interesting, and it was, thank you for the UNHCR and CISP. And you can see here the final result. If we go back to this one, we have the plots for the refugees. And what do we do with the space in between? If we ask the municipality to give it for free to the locals and to the refugees, we can foresee in some communal activities. So little by little, you can build back your community because you have a space where to do it. If you just have your plot, it's never going to happen. You need community spaces for social interaction, community building. So that's why we proposed to the municipality to give those spaces for free for the locals, in order to give them the chance to come up together.
Yeah, and one of these community spaces is the next project when I introduce you, because you can always shift these urbanistic studies back and forward. You can come from the public.
If you look on the top, you will see a reserve. When usually Niger people design settlements, they just leave big empty areas for urban infrastructures, like as the project that we're going to show next.
Because as we said, you can come from the settlement, or you can come from the public institution or the public building. And this is one public building that wasn't built as such because of lack of funds. But our idea was to have, like, basically, you see it right now as an oasis in the desert, but it is actually one of these elements, you know, that comes on site, and then around it, you know, you will have like a certain development of an urban grid, of an urban strategy.
Yeah, and this one, it's quite interesting also because we couldn't build it, unfortunately. Why? Because the site was too unsecure for too long. So at the end, CISP had to go fast because the project was ending, so we couldn't build it. And it's quite interesting because when we designed it, we thought about also terrorist attacks. If you create a community space, like as a market where people could gather, you attract lots of people. And then if you attract people, you also attract terrorists in that area at that time. So we had to come up with a solution in order to minimize the impact of a terrorist attack. And usually we spoke with the Italian army, which was in Niger, which is still in Niger at that time. We asked a very friendly captain what he thought about our design, and he said, this, I think, might work pretty good, because if somebody arrives with a suicidal jacket, it's going to explode in one of the corners, but it's not going to affect the remaining space. And also if somebody arrives with a rifle, the fact of having trees and the fact of having those, you see, 3 arches on the bottom will help to create a barrier between that corner and the other ones. So we decided to create this. You will see it better in this image. Where is it? Yeah, here. You see this is the center with the four corners. And also why we did the four corners, because we wanted to have not just a selling space, but a space where people could also bring their kind of not transformed food and transform it there. So you go there with some of the crops and then you transform it into flour, for example. Or if you have a welding machine, you go there and people will come with their bicycles or with whatever they had to weld, and then they can get fixed. Also, so that's why it's subdivided in four. And also something very important in the Niger context is not to create a very messy environment. That's truly architecture. It has nothing to do with migration, but to explain you why we design it this way. You see, the red people are walking closer to the boutiques, to the shops. Those are the shops that are going to be paid. So the richer
rented out, basically.
Exactly. And in the middle, we have this empty space where people will probably go and sell in an informal way. So we had to kind of organize a little bit the space, and this is how we did it. So you see, on close to the arches, we have a pathway, and in the middle we have that empty space that could be easily transformed into like a space in which people can pray, just gather, and in the future, when the trees will grow up, have a covered informal selling space.
So again, here it's about a multi-log of different types of spaces that are then interlocked again together, like in the Maidan tent, the 8 segments, and they can be like used individually and separately for themselves, but also as a huge market space as one.
Yeah, exactly. This is how we
yeah, I think due to time we have to skip the building techniques, which are quite interesting for us as architects. But
yes. And so this is the final project of the 4, and it's called the Classe Rouge, which is a classroom that we designed with. We design it and we build it with CISP, and thank you to ECC. We installed one segment of the arch at Giardini della Marianaressa. So if somebody wants to see one of the fragments, it's at Giardini. And this is a classroom that we designed keeping in mind the fact that education is super, super important, especially in such countries where the population is booming. In Niger, for example, every woman has at least 7.5 kids, which is incredible. We were talking about the fact that we are getting old, and our population is shrinking. Their population is exploding. Totally. Okay, not all of the 7 kids, unfortunately, will survive, but still, it's immense. The difference between us and the Nigerians, for example, it's huge. So
maybe here you see the shifting point between the temporary and the stable, the definitive, the stationary, because like. Of course, education can be temporary, but in this case, it should have also like the impression towards the outside to be something very stable, to be something that is like at the core of beginning, of starting again, of, you know, a space that you can, of course, use. I mean, we call it the classroom. It's actually a school, but our perception, our European perception of school is completely different, because school is an institution that has like a whole different background, and the classroom is just one element of this institution. Here it's the opposite, like the classroom is the starting point, and around this classroom the things then develop, you know, several classrooms develop, and then because of the several classroom, the aggregation of kids and the education of kids, other things can develop around this this school or this classroom, so to speak. And here you see again this shift. I mean, of course, the shape is quite similar to the Maidan tent, but it is made of bricks and concrete. It is made of materials which are stable, which are like concrete. Yeah? And nowadays, in the work of architecture, there is this huge issue about concrete being not sustainable and so on and so forth. It is true. Sometimes we could say concrete is less sustainable than other materials, but also there, I mean, we don't want to go deep into this topic, but also there, like, you could say, you see it here, like the yellow line is the concrete and the rest is brick. And we chose to make it out of concrete because in the end, calculating the gray energy that we would have used to burn the bricks in that place, it would have been more than using the concrete. So it has like this one slab, basically, or this one roof of concrete going over, and over that you have the air-baked, the air-dried bricks, which kind of give it, you know, a whole isolation and finish up the shape also towards the outside in order to contextualize this architecture in that specific context.
Yeah, we must also add the fact that in Niger they need buildings that are going to last 50 years. So, okay, concrete is bad, let's minimize its use, but we need to build something extremely durable.
Exactly.
So we prefer to have, if you break it up into like the next 20 years lifespan, the amount of concrete needed to build this, it's minimal. So the carbon footprint of this building, it's very minimal. And we use this particular shape in order to minimize as much as we could the amount of concrete need, because a self-supporting shell, it's a very well-responding shape. And then we cover it up with local bricks in order also to show people that using bricks, it's a good possibility. Stop copying Europeans, stop copying Swiss people. The climate, it's completely different. You don't need concrete.
Exactly.
You
use your materials, use your techniques, and try to improve
Yeah.
your techniques in order then to build, you know, upon them and to build better and to
Kind of,
improve the
yeah.
systematics of building.
Forget about us. It's your site, so it has to answer to your needs. And that's why we place this image, is because you see that all around you have only boxes covered with aluminium. That's how they build, that's what they know, and that's what they continue to replicate. We wanted to create something completely different to show also to the kids, which is way easier than impressing old people, showing kids that is doable. Think out of the box, literally. And voila, so that's why we did this way. And also, okay, we go fast. This is the internal space. We also plastered all the walls with clay in order to give to the kids the good feeling of touching the earth. So you stay inside, you feel the fact that there is a huge difference in terms of temperature.
So here it's about comfort in architecture,
yeah.
like really like creating a space where you can study, where you can learn, where you can like feel safe inside it, but at the same time feeling comfortable inside it. And you have, like, in comparison to the classrooms that are there on site, you have a difference of 5 degrees in cooling. So it's like way fresher. That means that you obviously, as somebody who has to study, you have the possibility to apprehend much more, you know, and to be much more concentrated on the things that you're doing inside of that space. And this is basically, then we can wrap it up. This is like action through architecture. So it has this vast scale of going, you know, through climatic benefits, like in these projects, over to social projects and social engagement projects, such as the Maidan tent, for example, or the urban city developments that you saw in the Mercada Saga, for example, or in other urban development projects. So it has like a very big span of action, and it goes from micro to micro, you know, and it goes back and forward like a journey, basically. And we're still on this path, we're still in this journey, and I'm happy to say that we enjoy it, and we're very, you know, all together, not just the two of us. But for example, we have Sam here who's working with us. So we're a big group of people, you know, that are growing more and more, and we're very, very happy to and very proud of the things we do.
Yeah, we have to thank Sam because he's the one who actually built this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. This is how we are thinking of possible solutions. These are our ideas, our solutions to. For different problems related also to migration, because also this classroom has been designed this way in order to be easier to build. So if you need 7, 10, 15 classrooms like that in wherever in the country, it's by using this system, you can build it easier. So you don't need super skilled people. Of course you do, Sam can confirm. You need some very good people for the foundations, for some specific aspects of the construction, but for the rest, we use the yellow movable framework that allows us to even build the classrooms in different sites. So for example, again, migrants, somebody's moving from his country desiring to reach, for example, Europe, as we said, and gets stuck somewhere. You stay there, it depends for how long, how the nation that receives you wants to treat the case. So if they accept migrants or not, in the case they accept, you might stay there for like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. What do? You create settlements and then you need infrastructure for those settlements. So we need something cheap, not cheap, but affordable, that also always has a good quality in it. So when we say, again, action through architecture, we think that by using good quality architecture, we can really impact people's life. So we were going to continue, and hopefully, we will come with some new projects in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bonaventura and Leo, for sharing your experiences through the project and your approach at ACTA. The last presentation is going to be done by someone you know very well, since you have been working quite a lot with the CISP, and you've been working with other NGOs and organizations. So to close and then move to the conversation within the panelists, I'd love to introduce our final panelist, Marco Labruna. Ciao, Marco. Marco Labruna is Development and Humanitarian Aid Specialist. Marco currently holds the position of Operational Coordinator of Programs in Africa at the NGO CISP, which translated is International Committee for the Development of Peoples. Since 2007, he has been living and working in Africa and the Middle East, coordinating, managing, and supervising programs with different NGOs in complex crisis contexts. In the last years, he has been focusing on enhancing the role of NGOs in developing urban planning and promoting urban architecture in Niger, with a specific attention to the partnership with local and traditional authorities. So, welcome, Marco.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for the opportunity. Maybe I will just share my screen. Okay, let me see. Can you see it? No, wait.
Yes, it was working.
Okay, okay, sorry, but I forgot to share the sound as they told me before. Okay. Okay, so once again, thank you very much, and I try to have to present you today a bit of the experience of CISP in Niger, in that particular sector of, let's say, in our at our organization we call it in the earth and architecture sector, but again, there will be different aspects that will touch. So I will just start saying briefly what is CISP. CISP is, as Lucia said, is the Comitato Internazionale per lo Sviluppo dei Popoli, in Italiano. Is a civil society organization that has been engaged in international cooperation, and this year we are turning 40 years. The organization is working in more than 30 countries, as you can see from the map, just as a reference. And the main sectors are listed here, as you can see. So it's health and water, education and culture, environment and climate, protection and rights, and food and income. These are the broad sector where we, how we group our projects, let's say. And then here is CISP in Niger, as it's the topic of the presentation of today. CISP has been working in Niger since 2006, and mixing and trying to carry out complementary both development and humanitarian aid programs. Again, one of the features of our intervention in many countries, and in Niger, I guess it's even more evident than in other places, is the strong collaboration and partnership with local authorities. And I would add, and I will come back later to this, and traditional authorities as well. Again, one of the features of our work in Niger, that you will find it in the project I will present later on, is the synergy and the complete the collaboration and the partnership with and support to the local development plans according to the local policies, let's say. And again, being an organization dealing with basically, as the name of organization contain the word development, we are mostly carry out development project, but in many cases we are working in emergency context. So we're trying, and Niger is one of our pilot countries in this since some years, to translating the idea of humanitarian development nexus into concrete action. Say that, I would just skip to the topic of the presentation of today, which is a short. I would like to take you through some of our experiences and approaches in Niger. As I call the presentation, is housing in Niger from emergency shelters to new housing models in earth and architecture. This is merging two aspects of our approach in Niger in this sector. Let's say that the interest and the engagement of CISP in art and architecture comes in the about 10 years ago, and being a development organization in Niger, we started touching and dealing with art and architecture from a cultural point of view, and so as let's say in terms of promoting traditional construction methods and recover some of the traditions in construction method that were getting lost. So the whole idea came up in 2012, 2014, when we started a project aiming at promoting the cultural industry in Niger, and architecture was one of the part of the cultural industry in the country. And in this case, what the project and what we did was an inventory of all or most almost all the arts and architectural buildings in the country that we grouped in a catalog. Here you can see just the cover page. You can find this in our website. It's a open document, and as a concrete result, we were tasked and managed to build and to create the Earth and Architecture Pavilion at the National Museum of Niamey. It was really the starting point. A few years later, we tried, and I hope we managed to bring forward this idea of recovering traditions and valorizing the Niger culture in terms of earth and architecture through a project which with the acronym of EPA, and it's the acronym of Emploi pour le patrimoine d'Agadez. In English is Employment for Agadez Heritage. In this case, one of the two components of the project, the one I'm focusing on, is the rehabilitation of over 100 houses in the old town of Agadez. Agadez is old town of Agadez. It's part of the cultural heritage of UNESCO. As you know, Agadez is a city in the desert. I mean, at the beginning of the Sahara Desert in Niger. It's very unfortunately famous and mentioned because it's in the migratory route from West Africa to Libya, as the presentation before showed us. And in this particular project, so we carried out this rehabilitation using local people, and so trying to increase social inclusion and participation of people of Agadez. And the other, let's say, target was to create employment. And we managed to really change the life of many people involved in the project through these construction works. Also, some more details about this rehabilitation can be found in our website. There is a catalog of which you can see some sample in this slide. Say that there is, we can pass to the second part of our experience in Niger, and it's more related to displacement. That is the topic of today. And I would like to, to underline that the next project I'm going to present have aims at showing the effort of CISP in Niger to propose a range of possible solutions to displacement and, let's say, to migration issues in general. I would like to underline that this topic is really relevant in Niger, linking to what our colleague from IOM mentioned before, says that most of the migration movement remains in Africa, and Niger is one of the country most affected, let's say, interested by this phenomenon. Just to give some numbers, around 700,000 people are in Niger, are there as a result of forcibly displacement. Let's say that part of them, almost 50% of them, are internal displacement, as was mentioned, and the others are refugees. So in this context, I would like to underline and to stress and to show a bit the effort of CISP to propose possible solution in this complex crisis situation. And of course, in this sense, the effort is going from the temporary shelters solutions to the next levels, that was the urban planning, so contributing to the urban planning of cities, of communities, and social housing through earth architecture. So I can proceed with the few of these projects. So one of let's say that one of the starting point is the region of Diffa, which was mentioned by Bonaventura and Leo at the beginning. In this case, before the project of urban planning that is going to be presented just afterwards, CISP started under in collaboration and with IOM, exactly, and with Italian cooperation between 2016 and 2017 to respond to the emergence of an high influx of refugees from Nigeria. In this case, CISP, together with a consultant, an architect, and his cabinet, his studio, we developed a prototype of tent to host refugee families in the area of DIFA, as the one that you can see in the picture. Again, I don't go to the detail from technical details because it's not my profession, but it's just to say that over these 2 years we provided around 1,000 of these stands to these families, together with the provision of family toilet. So to allow these families to access all the basic needs and services. And at the same time, we always take care about the capacity building component of our project. So there were technical training on how to assemble and how to maintain this shelter, and the characteristic of this shelter was that are modular, reemployable, and amortizable over time. And so I guess that was the starting point to respond to a very high number of people coming into Niger. After that, or let's say at the same time, the plan, the CISP strategy with the local authorities, because we have to not forget, and I would like to emphasize that all what you are seeing, that I'm presenting in each of these projects, there are a strong component of partnership with the local authorities, being them the municipalities, the regional council, or what the so-called are the so-called traditional authorities in Niger are a very strong component of the society, and without them, according to our experience, it's or impossible, or let's say very with a very small impact to carry out projects, because the traditional authorities sometimes are it's the sultan, sometimes are the head of the villages. They're really the people who can change the perception of the community about a project, about an intervention. So say that the other project that I want to briefly present is insist in the same area, in the same region, and is the one of providing durable accommodation. It's the first project of CSP where we tried and we carried out a project where earth architecture was put at the service of responding to a need, and in this case was ideally to allow the transition of refugees and some vulnerable members of host community in DIFA from the shelter you've seen before to a most durable solution, because by the time the government of Niger, as Bonaventura was saying at the beginning, decided to have an out-of-camp policy and to integrate as much as possible refugees and displaced people within the existing communities. So here you can see the first small houses done in earth architecture in DIFA. After that, or let's say again more or less at the same time, we integrated the part of urban planning, and maybe you as you can see from the picture, between 2017 and 2020 we with the support of UNHCR, we developed a first lotissement in Assagad, so a urban settlement in the municipal ground, let's say, land. And again, this same urban planning was then retaken and restudied by ACTA and the UNHCR, but at the beginning was a part of our project. And again, was the two main components again is the urban planning and the construction. Over the 3 years, we have been able to build and to assign around 640 houses to the same number of families. Again, just a small issue that I would like to highlight again. The construction, all the construction activities in this project are done by local workforce, let's say, local people in the community. So basically, our approach is really to emphasize, to highlight and to reinforce the capacity of the local community. So we are not hiring any construction company to build, and so it's it's something like really appreciating the community, because this means again a higher distribution of resources in the community. After that, the last part of my presentation is moving from the region of Diffa, where the security situation worsened at the point that we had to stop some of our project, and there was a pause and an interruption of that. The project was ended, but there was not other phases were not possible to be realized. At the same time, we moved and we restarted, and let's say we developed on that basis a project that is recently closed in Agadez. So we are going back to the area, the Agadez region, that is at the center of the migration route, and we can say that is since year living out of migration in a positive and a negative way. Just to underline the fact that until 2015 in Agadez there was a lot of smugglers that from there were starting bringing migrants to Libya. Of course, that was from a human point of view tragedy and a real problem. At the same time, we have to consider that there was a lot of people in the area of Agadez living out of the presence of migrants in the area. From economic point of view, 2015, when the Niger government banned the smugglers through a law, all of a sudden a whole economy around the city of Agadez collapsed, and and again, it's not climate migration, it's not war migration, but again are side effects of migration. In this context, we arrive at the project that one of them I mentioned before, with the rehabilitation of the city center, and this one is called Urbanization for Change. In this project, again, the objective, one of the objectives is to create job opportunities through an intervention in the construction sector, let's say. But again, the two components of the project were an inclusive urban planning of a new quarter in Agadez, with the aim of responding to the problem of overpopulation of the city center of the old town of Agadez. At the same time, the second part of the project is to build these social houses with the local authorities, are all owned by the municipality, which gave these houses to the most vulnerable families in the city center. Again, developing as much as possible the bioclimatic aspect of them. say that, I would say again, all these projects are well included and represented in our website with even some other documents. I would like to, before closing the presentation, with the tent, with the classroom, the prototype of the classroom in Niger, which has already been explained by ACTA. I would just ask you 1.5 minutes to look at this small video of concerning one of the houses built in Agadez.
Comment dirais-je, le troisième échantillon des prototypes. Lui qui a la particularité d'être réalisé avec les briques interstabilisées. Pourquoi on parle de briques interstabilisées? Parce que c'est des blocs de briques qui ont été stabilisés avec du ciment. C'est de la terre vraiment mélangée avec du ciment qui a les mêmes caractéristiques que le prototype ou bien l'échantillon qui a été visité, qui a été réalisé en banco avec coupole. Et l'une de ces particularités, il y a la fondation qui a été faite en béton cyclopéen. Et ce qu'on appelle le béton cyclopéen, vraiment, c'est un mélange de pierre et du béton. Donc, pratiquement, là aussi, il y a vraiment l'aspect économique qui est là par rapport aux fondations standards qu'on connaît où on a l'utilisation de fer à béton, des planches de coffrage et autres. Et pratiquement, voilà comment celui-là aussi se présente, avec toujours les mêmes dimensions de 18 mètres carrés avec deux pièces de 9 mètres carrés chacune. Et vous avez aussi les arcades qui sont là, et donc qui font office de linteaux. Et là aussi, il y a pratiquement une certaine économie qui est là par rapport au béton. Ça aurait été que c'est du béton qu'on avait utilisé. Donc, il y a quelques inconvénients qu'on a voulu corriger par rapport à ça. Et c'est une technique actuellement qui est en train d'être vulgarisée dans la ville d'Agadez.
Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry, I was supposed to. Yeah. I was supposed to have the subtitle in English, but something didn't work. I hope that was understandable anyway. So again, I think I'm running out of time, so I go to the last part, not spending too much word. So 2022, 2023, we've been working with ACTA, and it's even the reason why we are here today, because the classroom, the class Rouge, has been developed together in Niger, in Niamey. Actually, these pictures are the first prototype in Niamey. Again, what's the aim of having an NGO in this process? Again, to put together innovation from a technical point of view, which is the contribution and the precious contribution of ACTA, and all their attitude and their way of approaching the architecture in Niger and not only, and at the same time to be as an organization, try to make a synthesis, I mean, a link between these competencies in architecture and the real needs and the local processes that are ongoing. So again, I think it's the perfect example and synthesis on what is our aim in these activities that we are carrying out since more than 10 years in Niger, trying to support local processes, local policies to achieve long-term solution. And again, this done through partnership on technical level with ACTA and other technicians in other sectors, and the local and traditional administration in the country. It's a quite big challenge. But what I mean, I have some hope that continuing with this engagement. And again, thank you to Bonaventura and Leo for the support and for the collaboration. I hope that this can be, again, for the future. We'll have another step in this presentation. Thank you very much again. I will just interrupt my hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your presentations and for your input. This has been very much diverse. We have time for a few questions, and I have one question that I would like to address for everyone in this panel. Just to kick off our conversation for this late afternoon. So my question lies in, migration has been said that it's a solution and it's a resource, right? If we're thinking about a multidisciplinary, like a cross-sectional topic between all the presentations that all of you had, one resource that comes to my mind that has been highlighted in some presentations by Sarah, by Flavio, and has been an underlying resource within your other presentations is the economic resource. And to contextualize, 2 examples. Tunisia as a destination country. So the European, let's say, the European Union, the Italian government in particular, the Meloni government, channeled a lot of money recently over the news to in efforts to stop or to reduce illegal immigrations. On the other hand, Donald Trump built a wall in the United States. So there's a lot of throwing money to solve a problem. In your view, I don't want to dive a lot into politics over here, but how can we maximize every single dollar, every single euro that we have to ensure that this urgent issue is addressed in the right way and for the right reasons?
Can I?
Yes.
Well, yes, it's going to become political because migration is a political issue. And a lot of times I'm invited and say, okay, but let's not talk about politics. I mean, it's impossible. Even if as a United Nations, of course, we have to be very balanced because there are all member states, I mean, so we cannot. It is true, however, that the pact, the deal that didn't work, actually didn't work out very well, worked partially and was very controversial with Tunisia, was just another deal that followed the deal with Libya in 2017, signed by Italy, and the deal with Greece in 2016 with Greece, not with Greece, but with Turkey in 2016, signed by EU. So the solution to stop these irregular migration flows that, as I told you, are a problem because people die and because of the humanitarian consequences, is closing the routes and sending back migrants. This is the approach of the European politics. Actually, the point is that the crisis, the migration crisis, the so-called migration crisis, actually, because again, 1 million people are arriving in an area where there are 450 million. At the time, the UK, 500 million people. I mean, it was completely manageable. I mean, so it was not such a big number, but it was perceived as a big number again. So the migration crisis was the first economic crisis that Europe, EU has to face after 2000. The other crises that Europe had to face were mainly economic and financial crises, Greece, Euro, etc. So it was the first political crisis, and Europe failed, of course, because the answer was to close the borders, to stop Schengen somehow, for some reason in some areas, and to sign a deal with Turkey, so to stop migrants from coming, not actually find a solution to accommodate migrants. So again, the only country who actually had a long-term approach to this situation was Germany. And I link that to your question. The only way to change the approach, which is mainly linked, as I told you, by the next general election and then propaganda, the lack of vision, is to, I don't know if fortunately or unfortunately, it depends, but we have to face the situation, is to have the support of the private sector. Angela Merkel opened to Syrians because the private sector in Germany told her to open to Syrians, to welcome Syrians. Now, this government, which didn't win the election for his famous pro-migrants approach, open now a flow decree for 452,000 migrants for the next 3 years to enter Italy. And the last government in Italy who actually took this decision was, I don't remember which government, it was 13 years ago. So after 13 years, a right-wing government decided to open the borders in the next 3 years to 450,000 regular migrants. How? Let's see, because in Italy everything is quite complicated and I don't know. But they made this decision. Why? Because the private sector pushed the government. They asked for 800,000, not 452,000. So in order to change this waste of money, of paying regimes like in Libya, of militias or governments or border management, etc. So I don't want to say that there are all regimes, of course, but as far as Libya is concerned, we know very well the situation there is quite complicated, but we gave money to Libya. In order to change this approach, we as United Nations and in general as international organizations, civil society, we will never be heard by governments. The private sector will. So speaking with the private sector, I'm understanding that they are a powerful resource in order to change this approach of Europe and in general of the Western world towards immigration. So to change the approach and to have a long-term approach. This is the only, I would say the only hope, but it is actual. I mean, it's factual. What happened now in Italy with this new decree flow is the demonstration that actually, yeah, the private sector can have an impact. And again, just to make another comment, I'm very happy to have heard this very interesting presentations about how architecture can have an impact. And I think that we all have to work together because it's all cross-sectional, as you were saying. And so it's super interesting to see how, guys, you did a wonderful job. I was super surprised and super happy about what I said, what I saw. And so congratulations, really. I hope that in the future the different sectors could work all together to build a better world. Also here in a destination country, when we talk about architecture, I'm thinking about the fact that the cities, the urban context is very important when we are talking about integration. So it's very important also to develop a urban context that could help to tear down barriers. Because migrants and refugees and asylum seekers and victims of trafficking, whatever, once they arrive here, yes, at the beginning there are these categories, but at one point we need to tear down also barriers and categories, and all these people must become, like us, citizens of one single community, our community. So the urban context should reflect that. So you have an important task for the future. Okay.
Indeed, thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Flavio, for your input and presentation. We will get back to exactly that point with Bonaventura and Leo. But I want to migrate to the other side of the ocean to Sarah. What do you think? What would be the best way to utilize all of these resources for the long term, or to ensure that this topic is addressed in the right way?
Yeah, thanks so much for turning it to me. I think, one of the things that was really interesting in the presentations is this idea that we really need to think about more legal pathways for migrants. And I think, you know, some of the statistics that we saw from IOM, you know, these risks are all because there aren't enough legal pathways for migrants. There is risks along the migration trail, but risks when they arrive. And the fact that migrants contribute so much to our economy is so underestimated. And, you know, one of the things that we were really trying to highlight in the Central American case is that, you know, in the United States, we depend on migrants for our economy, which is also what our presenters were re-emphasizing. I think right now, in the United States, right? I mean, we were able to make a small impact by creating an additional quota for Central American migrants, those legal pathways. And I think emphasizing the loss of money is helpful, at least for the politicians within the United States. So one of the reasons that we focused on the funding and the money lost was to really emphasize that condition, that we are migrants are spending so much money, but also we are spending so much money to keep them out, even though we depend on them for our food every day on the table. But also the fact that, you know, in the United States, we do send a lot of aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, but these remittances are helping with that aid in those countries as well. And so kind of reframing the problem within these, I guess, money talks. And when you follow the money, you can really help to change sometimes the minds of politicians. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that. I think this idea of private sector is super important, that you mentioned. And right now, we are in the United States having an influx of migrants into what we call sanctuary cities, that allow migrants to stay even if they don't have legal status of yet. But the government is not helping with those migrants. And so it's really the private sector that has been stepping in to help with housing and perspectives. But again, legal pathways need to be created, and how we can emphasize that is something that I think can help change the political agenda. And I think that's in the United States, but I think very much also in Europe.
Thank you so much, Sara, for your input and sharing, everything that is happening and all the aid. Bonaventura and Leo, as architects, what do you think about that?
Well, coming back of what you just said, maybe it's seen now from a less architectonical point of view. Like, we're architects, so we try to order and create space which is approachable and space in which you can feel safe and well. But thinking as a humanist, you know, architects, they have like these two visions, you know, the technical approach and the humanistic approach. And I used to be, since my studies, and I still am very interested in this one notion that came up in the mid-1800s by Immanuel Kant, and it's the notion of the Weltbürger. So the Weltbürger is the world citizen. And, you know, to create a space, a place where you can feel home, I think that is a little bit our aim. So quoting again maybe Goethe, hier bin ich Mensch, hier darf ich sein. So here I'm human, here I can be. It's a little bit our intention with acting with space and architecture, creating something where you put behind the political issues, you put behind the belonging issues, maybe the background issues, and for that specific moment that you are, I don't know, also in a space like this, you know, a fantastic place to be. You're just here, and you know, you can interact with people, and you can basically feel the identity of this space reflecting back upon you and shaping you in a different way. So, you know, we can go back to politics and we can wrap up a whole political discussion, but in the end, you know, what we do is, because space, that's the way it is, you know, it's a static moment, it's a static fraction, and, you know, our idea is to, you know, to shape the best possible situation in that specific surrounding and in that specific context where we act.
Yeah, I would just like to add a couple of things. I was in Haiti 2 days ago, and I saw that the Dominican Republic is building up a wall, like Trump is doing. It's a smaller wall. Everybody knows that the day after it's going to be finished, people will like turn around and get in. People are so dependent, like the Dominicans are super dependent from the Haitians. If you stop the community, the flow of people, the Dominican Republic will collapse immediately. Like as we said, imagine that tomorrow migrants will leave the country, everything will stop. But one thing is that this is a natural process. The flow of people from one country to the other has been on since the very beginning of human societies, and it's unstoppable. It's a dream to think that people will stop moving. Dream, impossible. We can flood Frontex and all the agencies that are there to patrol. We can put tanks, we can put like missiles, but people will always move. Why don't we spend some money into integration process? Instead, I remember when I was in Greece that people were moved into hotels in mainland, and I remember that it was crazy. People were like just standing out of the hotel, doing nothing, zero. And after like 6 months, I think you will jump from the window. Like you don't live anymore. Why don't we spend just a fraction of the money that we're spending in pushing them back into try to integrate them? It's going to be beneficial for the local economy as well. Imagine how many teachers we can hire, how many schools we can renovate, how many things we can do with the money that we're just spending in trying to integrate people instead of saying no. I can understand that opening the borders, it's impossible. It's a political issue. Local people will never understand it, and we maybe don't have the capacity now to absorb the entire flux. But try to transform somebody which comes from another country into like, I don't know, an Italian. Teach him how to speak Italian, first of all. And if you look at the Roman Empire, it was made of like Libyans, so-called barbarians. We don't say it, but lots of Roman emperors were black, or maybe like not very black as in Congo person, but Northern Africans, yes. So why don't we spend some little money into building something that helps these people to integrate and to become active part of the society? So and that's a political thing. It's super complex. I'm not Meloni.
And if you have the feeling of home, you cherish it, you know. That's also something that, you know, if you have the feeling that you belong somewhere, you know, also for a fraction of time, because we're all moving, you know. I come from Italy, from northern Italy. I studied in Munich. I work in Switzerland and teach in Switzerland now. So, of course, like it's a different circle of movement, but we're constantly on the move, you know. And the most important thing is that while you stop moving, you feel home. And as soon as you feel home, you cherish the place where you are, and then maybe you move again, you know. But this is at the core of everything, you know, this feeling of being centered in a place.
In Italy, we had 2-3 years where migration flows by sea were decreased a lot. So there was time and space and money to spend to work on integration, and governments never decided to do something for that. And about language classes, I remember in 2018, a former Minister of Interior cut the costs of integration activities, and the reception centers in Italy, who formerly could provide language classes to migrants had to stop to organize these lessons because the government, 2018, decided to cut the costs. So migrants were in these reception centers without even having the possibility to have language courses. It was a political decision. But then we spend money for repatriation centers that are not working, that are useless, but again, so it's just political, unfortunately. I'm not saying the name of the former Minister of Interior. You can guess.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. And I really want to echo that subject like that topic in particular, because this is something that is extremely important, the integration of the migrants in their host communities. And I want to point this to the architects over here. As architects, we always have the capacity to not just design and create spaces, right, but also to embrace the people, the ideals. We possess the innovative design thinking, cultural sensitivity to create space, place that not only the basic needs, but also nurture a sense of hope, a sense of continuity, and a sense of belonging. So my question to starting with you, and I also want to involve Marco in the conversation online, and Sarah, and then bring it back to Flavio to see the other side of you. What do you think are the key elements that design of new spaces should have to encourage the interaction between the migrants and the host communities while fostering the sense of belonging and inclusivity?
There's probably a very large study behind, it's because it's not something generic, Sometimes it's generic, it can be something generic, but at the same time it becomes very specific. So it's always this back and forward between a generic approach and a specific one. Specific, I mean like studying the culture, studying the place where you build, studying the materials where you build, studying the modus operandi of how people and this culture that is settled in this place built before you. And all of these elements, they are they live inside the perception of the people that live there. And if you manage to tickle a little bit this perception in a positive way, so if you manage to take out the negative elements of a certain way of doing things and enhance the positive ones that are already there. So we don't invent nothing new. We just use what is there and we try to enhance what we think is best for people to carry out, to develop, and what we think is best for us to kind of show them again that, for example, the Classe Rouge building with the covers of bricks, so they all of a sudden they see, and we see as well, because we learn constantly on our path. It's not that we come there and we know everything and then we start building something, but it's exactly this interaction with the people on site. What can you do with bricks all of a sudden? It opens completely new paths. And how can you do it? Can you do it in a very complex way? Then it's maybe not needed, because complex, everybody can do complicated things. But how can you do it the most simple way possible with the greatest effect? The greatest effect in terms of how you feel the space when you live it, and in terms of how fast and how efficient can you build it. And of course also in financial terms. To build something that is expensive is not the aim. To build something that is cheap and collapses the next day is also not the aim. So we always have to kind of try to find this middle path, and it's always like a cultural, a ping pong, or like an interaction between a cultural approach and an approach of techniques, and also maybe of our own background, of what we think could be improved. And I have to say, luckily, we didn't fail so far. So, I mean, it could happen that we have, maybe we enhance something that is actually not meant to be enhanced, but because we see it with, and we cannot see it other ways. We have to see it with our European eyes, basically. That's the way it is, right? I mean, that's, you know, you cannot deny who you are. That's the way it is. But what we can do is we can open our eyes as much as we can, and we can broaden our horizon in order to see with the eyes of other people, and in order to implement the architecture for them and together with them.
Yeah, I think this idea of the role of design within this process is
in your, I don't know, you are in your office in Milan and you design something for Tanzania. It doesn't work. You have to go to Tanzania, you have to study a little bit Tanzania, you have to speak with Tanzanese people, ask them what do you want, and then find out a solution that makes what they want to have doable. Because most of the times you don't have the budget to do whatever they want to do. So you have to find the balance between what you can and what they want. And also, as Leo said, let's integrate both things. So everything should be based, I think, on the dialogue between the developer of the project, the final client, the utilizer, and the architect. If one of these three persons doesn't speak with the others, it's going to be a failure, I think. So the thing is, speaking.
Community engagement is is extremely important and very relevant. And I think Marco also touched on that aspect in his presentation as well when he was speaking about the engaging with the society. So, Marco, to you, what do you think about that?
I guess I'm in line with what Bonaventura and Leo said. I would like really. I think that we have lost, or we should have more capacity of listening to. I guess that one of the key elements of trying to find solution is not only speaking each other. I mean, that's an important part, but listening to what others have to say. And by experience, I guess in most, at least to my limited experience in some countries, I can say that most of the solutions that we are looking for, they're already there. I mean, they have clear ideas. Sometimes they have clear ideas on how to deal with refugees, migrants internally in some countries, and maybe they are just they just need a partner, not someone who comes to do things for them. And it's what we are trying to do. Of course, there are some aspects that can be an added value brought from an organization as us, as from an architecture studio as ACTA, but still the origin and at the basis of this, I guess it's to support local processes. And just to connect, just a small comment on the question that you had before, I guess how to spend better money. Everything was said on how to spend money better to welcome migrants, to create a legal pathway. But on the other side, I guess that we should spend some money to go and listen to the origin countries. What do they think about it? I mean, I think that they are not all crazy people, that they just want their young people go away and risking their life. So maybe some ideas are there, and I guess that we are too much focused on blocking them, putting walls and managing the process, but the origin is still there. And as long as the origin is there, and I'm not saying like to solve all the problems of Africa, of course, but specific issues can be addressed. For example, in many countries in the last years, one of the constant message that we receive, that is the problem is to create job opportunity, then can be declined in many ways. I don't have the solution, but for for some of the countries that we are mentioning as origin countries, the problem is that they are not able to provide enough job opportunities, so income opportunity for the young people, that of course they need to look better condition. Our job in having new houses, schools, and whatever, it's part of the solution. I mean, it's not the solution, of course, but it's part, meaning trying to improve living condition in some areas, but listen to what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Sara, we started the conversation with you, and we would like to end with you. I saw you were taking some notes. What do you think on that matter?
No, I mean, I think what everybody is mentioning in this idea of a co-design process is like absolutely essential. And I just want to add, I think that, you know, urban planners we are trained to create those dialogues. Should be translators between multiple fields. I always think of planners as translators, right? We have to translate between the architect and the government, and between the community, the government, and the architect, and always in this hard position. But it's about dialogue that really creates the change. And I think it's through co-designing that we also learn about each other. And in that learning process, both we learn about the people that we are helping to care for, or are we care to care for, but also, you know, they are learning too. And I think a lot of projects that I have worked on that have more of an architectural feel to them, is that we are building tools and skills through that dialogue, and that we are, you know, so in the process of creating the architecture or intervention, we are also building skills. And so even in the work of the tapestry, I think one of the things we really wanted to do is co-design a way for the migrants to tell the story from their perspective. And I think oftentimes, you know, in data, when we create statistics, it's hard to humanize those statistics. But I think through the process of working, we empowered many of those migrants to see different pathways forward. So design allows us to create those dialogues. And I think that's what's really important, creating the dialogues of making, but also allowing the dialogue of things that we want to push away, and policymakers want to push away, and have that conversation outside of the normal domain, to hopefully affect change. So we are affecting change for the communities we work in, for those communities outside, and really iterating on that along the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think the conversation could go on and on and on, but we are running out of time, and we have our final concluding presentation. I thank you all. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Marco, for connecting online and being with us in this panel. Flavio, Bonaventura, and Leo, thank you so much for your input. We're happy to continue this conversation in another panel, maybe, because there's a lot to be discussed and shared. Thank you. A big round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Grazie. Thanks again to all panelists to participate in our conversation, and I hope that you will have the chance before the closing on Sunday to go and see also the project exhibited by Sara and by Bonaventura and Leo, together with the CISP in the Time Space Existence exhibition. Now to our final presentation for the day. We'd like to invite on stage Javier, Arpa Fernandez, and Adrien Ravon. Sorry for the pronunciation. We have a project and a research that they're gonna share more about with us, and then later we'll be also able to experience through an installation that is presented in Palazzo Mora. So I leave it to you.
Yes. Let me introduce Javier and Adrien. So Javier is a research and education coordinator at the Y Factory at TU Delft in the Netherlands, and the curator of the public programs at the Faculty of Architecture at the Built Environment. He's also the editor-in-chief at MVRDV. Currently, he is pursuing a PhD at RMIT University, exploring the dissemination of architectural and urbanism practice and the necessity to connect academic research in urbanism with the wider public and inspire action. Adrien is an architect and an academic engaging in research, teaching, and production. Since September 2011, he is been part of the Y Factory at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment at TU Delft. He has participated in research and education projects, been responsible for the production of digital design tools, and actively collaborated in the public dissemination of ideas about the city of the future through lectures, exhibitions, and publications. Javier and Adrien, the floor is yours. Please share with us more about the Green Dip.
Thank you.
Yes, let me take
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's always a pleasure to be hosted by Lucia and Hadi. This is, several occasions we have been together, and I'm happy to be here again. I wish I could have participated or asked questions in the previous panel. I was really fascinated by the conversation. I want to keep on adding or commenting, but I don't think I have the time. But long story short, I would like to really thank Flavio. I don't know where he is. For I don't know how many times he said today that immigration is not a risk. And I think we all need to be reminded constantly, no? Because at the end of the day, we are the ones that are voting for, and I don't mind saying the names, voting for Meloni, Salvini, Orban, Le Pen, or Hertz in the Netherlands, who was the winner of the election 2 days ago. And those people, they don't care about the fact that illegal or legal immigration, and I don't know where Flavio is a risk or not. For them, any kind of immigration, anybody who's different is a risk. Anyway, so I would have loved to build up on that conversation, but I have to talk about the work that we do at the Y Factory. Today we are presenting an installation at Palazzo Mora. You are more than welcome to join us. I will start speaking about who we are, and then give the word to Adrien Ravon, my colleague, to explain better what is it the Green Dip about. Who are we, the Y Factory? The Y Factory is a think tank, it's a department or a section within the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment at the University of Delft in the Netherlands, who actually today had to launch or to send everybody, every member of the university community, a manifesto, a message saying, please be sure that we will not kick you out. Because 2 days ago, Hilders, who won, sorry, but it's impactful what we are seeing today. We're talking about immigration, but the new, possibly Prime Minister of the Netherlands is asking foreign students to leave because they are making housing prices rise. So this is the environment in which we are. This is the place where we work. This is a space designed by Vinny Mas. Vinny Mas is the leader and the founder of the Y Factory. Probably you know him better for his work at MVRDB, the company that he co-funded. At the Y Factory, we are deeply interested and deeply involved in research, education, and public engagement. And we do it by thinking of or speculating in the cities of the future. We, as I said, research and educate, and also have a quite important side, which is the dissemination of the ideas of the work that we produce outside academia throughout many platforms, be it publications, be it exhibitions, like the installation that we can see from today at Palazzo Mora, etc., etc. No? Because at the end of the day, what we want to talk is about the city of the future, architecture, and the public. No? So all these works that you are seeing here now are public displays of the work that we have produced, because we want to engage with the public on trying to understand what the city of the future might be. I will not explain each of the projects because then we won't have the time, but I invite you to check the work that we do through online or with our publications. No? But as what you see here is this, I'm focusing very much on how many exhibitions or displays, etc., or conversations we have been having with all sorts of publics throughout these years. The Y Factory is already, I think, over 15 years already. Adrien actually works for the Y Factory longer than I do, no? But you see in these images all the effort that we have made in order to transmit and to pass the messages to the general publics. There was a moment in our, let's say, work or professional careers in which urgencies, we have been talking about urgencies today, we have been talking about the climate emergency, etc., started to be so important that we started, let's say, thinking about it and trying to incorporate them into our curriculum, no? And try to talk about it and design solutions with our students. In 1967, for the very first time, we looked back at our planet. Within stable conditions, that planet had evolved and different climates had developed. Different climates led to different species. Over time, different species evolved, resulting in an incredibly rich Earth, full of complex systems and beauty. Planet Earth is 4.5 billion years old. 200,000 years ago only, humans first appeared. If you condense the Earth's lifespan into 24 hours, then we have been here for 3 seconds only. We migrated in these 3 seconds. We densified. We also formed complex systems. And with them, we started influencing the natural world. We built vast networks and started mining our planet's richness to power them. In less than 300 years, we changed global temperatures. In less than 100 years, we changed the balance of our oceans. In less than 50 years, we altered the very composition of the air we breathe. With alteration came annihilation of entire areas. We polluted the land as well as the oceans. And with all the above, we began to lose richness. And we lost a lot of beauty. And we could lose more. We are still warming up the planet. We are still using more and more land and agriculture. We're still using more and more energy. We're still driving up carbon emissions. We're still producing more and more waste. And we're still demanding more and more of the Earth's water supply. We're still making more and more noise. We're still making sea levels rise. We are losing forests. We are losing species. We are losing beauty. 3 seconds have gone. And in these 3 seconds, we have been on the planet. We have moved from those initial maps that you see there on the left to the maps on the right. Sorry to be a little bit of a tragic here, but the situation is bad. The 4th second. So what's next? What is it that we are going to do in this 4th second? And this is where we have started operating. This is where we design at the Y Factory for that 4th second. No? Not only us have thought of everything that I was very quickly summarizing. No? So many other authors are claiming to do something. No? I don't need to read all these quotes, but something that started to be more and more important in the work that we produce at the Y Factory is sentences like this, no? We are looking at the design-related exploration of states of symbiosis with the natural world, no? And this has started, let's say, setting up the agenda of the Y Factory in the last days, in the last years. So this is what we are going to present today, no? Not only a research, but the need to act. So what we do with our students is to try to move from this discrepancy, this situation I was explaining in the beginning, to how do we find balance. And in order to find that balance, we need to act. The idea of action is something that we are trying to communicate, transmit, and work with our students. Not only with our students, we also do it through other means. In 2019, Vinimas and I, we were appointed directors of the Milanese magazine. I don't need to explain, I'm in Italy, so I don't need to explain what Domus is. Some other places I need to, because journals have gone down somehow. Anyway, so we included this in terms of action. We included this, let's say, series of urgencies within the work that we did for Domus. And this is the first drawing that we published. This is for us design. This is us, humans, changes the face of the planet in many, many ways. This is, of course, you know what this is. And this is human action, human design at the scale of the planet. We also published migrations. This is exactly what we're talking about today, how women every day need to look for water. And normally they take their children with them, which means that children cannot actually go to school. We also refer to many other contexts, especially Africa, no? Where actually very little of the work or very little of the capital that is invested goes into the projects that are fantastic and which we saw a few minutes ago. The most of the money go into, let's say, new cities that don't have anything to do with the realities of or the context where these places are being built. Anyway, we spoke about destruction and we spoke about the destruction of the forest, which is also for us design. And this is what we try to transmit it from a Y factory point of view into a journal like Domus that year. No? So we also enter politics, and I don't mind saying that everything is politics, and it's not only me who says that. No? And politics have a certain, let's say, consequences on the built environment, and politics is also the result of the built environment. No? If you look at the results of Brexit and the maps of Brexit, you will understand that there's a direct relationship between urbanization and election results. The same happens in the Netherlands 2 days ago. Anyway, this is what we're trying to consider as well. What is the role of Europe? No? Are we just becoming an amusement park? And you all know where we are. This is where many of you live, and this is where we are today. What's the role of Europe, or what are our cities going to become or are becoming? No? We cannot even afford living in places like Venice any longer. We need to move outside. It doesn't only happen in here, but it also happens in many other cities, Amsterdam, Barcelona, you name it. No? So this is actually what we try to bring to Domus that year. We publish a manifesto which is called Everything is Urbanism. Today I would also say Everything is Politics. I'm actually very happy because the director of Domus is entering the room, and I'm talking about him. Anyway, at the end of that year, we tried to summarize everything that we had published that year, no? How we started with those urgencies and how we tried to display them within the magazine. And at the Y Factory, with Adrien, we produced this map. This is the map of the world that we published in 2019. No? This is the map of the world that we left right before the pandemic. One of the things that I actually wonder is how much has that world changed from what we left before the pandemic, but this is probably another discussion. Anyway, this is something that has kept us busy for quite a long time. What are the urgencies that affect not only the built environment, but directly or indirectly? No? There are many of these same urgencies. How do we categorize them? What do we do about them? And then we did all this research. I'm not going to enter here, no, because this is extremely probably boring, because this is an exercise of sorting, no? sorting all these lists. And then how do you express them? And this is work done with our students. No? So then how do you represent all those urgencies so that we can pass that message, you know, that we were trying to also pass in Domus that year, no? This list of urgencies that is completely boring to read became finally this section of the crust of the earth, no? That summarizes the results, the consequences of all activities of human beings on the planet, the ones that I was already mentioning, no? So this is how we try to finally try to produce this kind of design container that summarizes our presence on the planet in these last 3 seconds in which we have lived only, no? So anyway, this is how we did it, and then Finally, one of the works that we started to initiate, or that we initiated, is the Green Dip. The Green Dip is, I would say that the word that Vinimas usually uses is the trilogy. It's the first part of a trilogy that is the Green Dip, biodiversity, and finally biotopia, from plants to animals, to an entire world that will be functioning and being designed with us for nature. So we have been busy trying to understand what the relationships with nature are, from the very small to the very large, to any kind of organisms, etc., to even fashion, how fashion can actually be built and be part of nature. Design in general is part of nature, and how nature is not only at the micro scale, but at the bigger scale, and makes up the world. There's this work that we are trying to let's say, throughout this year to accumulate in order to say that with us and for nature, we need to design that way. I'm going to give the word now to my colleague Adrien, so that he explains more in detail what the Green Dip publication and the Green Dip research is about, this first one of the 3 books that we are now working with.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Javier. Let me see. Yes. Thank you, Javier. Well, we were planning to bring, let's say, the Green Dip book printed today, and we need actually a few more weeks. That's where we are right now. And that's one of the research indeed we wanted to present today. So I tried to take like 15 minutes to go through it quickly. So the Green Dip book is like, it's not a manual or a report on how to green cities, but it's more like kind of an invitation and a journey through exploring these scenarios of what would happen, how would it look like, and how would our cities perform if they would be completely covered with vegetation. So Urgent Earth, indeed, we started like all this work based on this section where we wanted to see, let's say, all the interconnections between the risk and the urgencies that we try to display on these sections. So green, yes, green. So that's a book in 3 parts where we try, let's say, first to explain why green, why is it important, why is it a trend, and then, let's say, we propose to draft a tool or a method on how, let's say, can we visualize, can we measure the impact and the benefits and the cost of greening our cities. I go through you. Okay. So basically, we want to raise awareness and, let's say, work on new pacts between human and nature. So we see some trends, many trends on the, let's say, integration of vegetation into buildings. Like we see some successful examples, we see some controversies, and so on in housing. We see, let's say, many examples of green facades. We see some examples of green rooftops, trying not only beneficial for the environment, but also potentially making rooftops accessible for the public, and so on, and so changing, let's say, architecture. While we see this trend of covering, let's say, hiding buildings under green carpet, we see, let's say, this idea of climate control, of having green and nature on the glass bell. We see the integration of green inside interior. So we look at all those precedents from wood, and we also ask some questions about green gentrification. To whom does it benefit? Green as a real estate alibi, and so on. We also, Javier was mentioning those, let's say, projects where you have like hyper-green visions of future cities from scratch in the middle of the desert, and what would be the impact and the resources needed to build, let's say, such cities. We also see, let's say, influence on shapes of buildings and a blend between vegetation and architecture, and new forms of buildings appearing. So what plants can do? Well, we wanted to look at, let's say, how can we measure all the ecosystem services and what would be the impact, like in terms of carbon emission reduction, improve air quality, impact on biodiversity, on temperature moderation, on water management, and so on, and economic implications. But there are also like some more subjective performances, and that makes, let's say, that we like to be next to nature, and that make us as a human feel good. And then we started, let's say, this dream, and that's what this publication is about, to go through this dream and this vision of greening cities. Okay. So here you see we wanted to look at the planet in terms of biomes, the fact that ecoregions are changing, evolving, also due to climate change, that all of the forests are not the same all over the planet, which is like not actually what we see in projects. If you type future cities or green cities on the internet, you always see the same kind of vegetation, same kinds of plants, and that's what we wanted to critically look at. This is, let's say, kind of, according to different sources, we have between 1% and 3% of urbanity on the planet. And we wanted to see what this 1 or 3%, if covered with vegetation, what could it do for the planet? And we start in, so where to start? We started to look at cities like Beijing, for example, completely covered with green. Imagine, let's say, that different urban forms will be covered, becoming like this kind of forest, urban forest. What would be, let's say, the view in different cities? What would be, let's say, skyscrapers covered with vegetation? What types of plants would grow where? What would be, let's say, all the side effects or impacts and benefits of greening cities? What would be the future of mobilities, and do we still need car? And so on. Imagine, let's say, this kind of pedestrian bridges and so on, access to rooftops, bringing more biodiversity in the city. Every canal becoming like every place with water would also be public park. And same here in Kinshasa. If we move on to Milan, if we would continue, and then what would be, let's say, this, how would that change, let's say, the street, the way we interact with each other, the way we meet, if every patio would be, let's say, a place where to mitigate heat island effect, and so on, or here in Sao Paulo. And where you have, let's say, some, depending on, let's say, the density of this urban forest, what kind of atmosphere would emerge. Green voices, we wanted to talk to, we heard today, let's say, this necessity to talk to each other, to listen each other. So we talked to different experts, recalling us that time will prove that greening works, that we need some time to see plants growing. We looked at different, let's say, projects, some completely excluding human presence, like on the top by Gilles Clément, like inaccessible nature in city, or let's say post-industrial heritage in cities, and so on. What kind of atmosphere, tiles out, plants in, like this idea of having spontaneous nature and not controlling it. Let's say what's the benefits or what's the, let's say, performances of such a grass lawn, let's say, versus more diversity. So we talked to urban ecologists, we talked to, let's say, a tree nursery, telling us about different types of growing trees so that they will be more stable and more solid on top of, on a rooftop, and so on, and so on. And then I take you to the green maker, which was, let's say, drafting this methodology or this tool in order to, let's say, combine the knowledge of buildings with the knowledge of plants. So that's a draft. And what it does is basically taking, well, it starts in different parts, where we start with mapping flora, where you look at all those biomes in the world with different properties based on their precipitation, humidity, temperature, and so on. Then we have a library of plants. All this work is the work that we produce at the Wild Factory, that we produce with our students, and that we are showing here. So making, let's say, all this accessible knowledge about plants that we sometimes and very often as urban miss. So we have this catalog of plants that are sorted by biomes, that you can sort alphabetically by water needs and so on, and that you can compare, that are becoming, let's say, the building blocks of our cities. And then we looked at different products, let's say series of components, trying to fusion this idea of nature and architecture. Okay, you see some examples for floors, and that will be, let's say, this catalog of products. Then we looking at all those precedents and successful examples of what has been done. We look at different ways of incorporating green on rooftops, on facade, on balconies, green dripping, green infill, and so on and so on. And then testing cities as canvases. So that's a step-by-step method where basically you can look, let's say, in different cities, load any piece of urban fabric, and then step-by-step picking one of greening strategy and being able to apply it, let's say, to, for example, here, rooftops. Then systematically, you always have the same kind of evaluation so that you can compare, and then adding a next step, let's say, on facade, on balconies, in the interiors, on the public space, and then having all these kind of evaluations that are done systematically, where you can calculate what would be, let's say, the impact on CO2 absorption, potential heat island effect mitigation, and so on. And we do that for any piece of city fabric that you can see here. So the next forest, how would it feel? How would it look like? Here we have some sound, I think, that should be working. And where you can see, sound doesn't work? No. Well, that's this whole atmosphere, like raising more questions than solutions. But here in New York or in Mumbai, how different would it be? And what would be, let's say, those different impacts? How buildings could, let's say, disappear, and so on. If we extrapolate all this method towards, let's say, this idea of a planetary forest, towards this idea of a system of parks, where cities would be, let's say, constitute a network of green, what could be potentially all those impacts? Imagine that based on this, by bringing, let's say, different experts around the table, we could assess and extrapolate and link back this scenario of greening cities to planetary scale. So this scenario will not save us compared to what Javier was introducing. It will not completely happen, but that's, let's say, some steps and some successful, we already saw some successful example and a method that if carefully done, let's say, can have a real impact on the planet. And here, I think I stop and I give back the pointer to Javier.
Thanks, Adrien. So just to wrap up a little bit, this is just, as I mentioned, the very beginning of a certain amount of work that we are producing towards what we call biotopia, no? How we not only work with flora, but how can we work with all sorts of materials, no? And with the students, we try to produce this kind of far-fetched visualizations of what the world might end up being if we apply all these materials, techniques, if we keep working with us for nature. No, in the end, we end up producing this kind of sponge, which is a very abstract visualization of what the future might be. No, we can do it with other different materials, and then we look at different, let's say, animations of how the city, always using the same section in order to be able to compare, how the same section would evolve if we start implementing those materials. I want to show this in terms of, this is design speculation, this is all far-fetched, and you can say, yeah, well, this is science fiction, what are you talking about, but et cetera, et cetera. But I think we have quite a strong current, present agenda, and this is what I want to finish up with, no? That we do at the Y Factory is actually rooted on current issues, current topics. I think that you already got it from my introduction, no? Because I think we love talking about the future. But to me, in the last times, the more we talk about the future, the more uncomfortable I feel. Because I have the impression that future is becoming sort of an alibi in order not to address current topics, in order not to, like a few minutes ago, we don't even dare to tell the names of this or that police station, you know. So I believe that the future is now, that we need to work with the present, and this is one of the also important foundations of what we do at the Y Factory, that has to do with dealing with the public, producing ideas for the future of existing cities, this is Eindhoven, and talking to the citizens and let them know what is it that the cities could like. No, that was Eindhoven. This is ideas for Marseille that we did with our students, engaging with the public, no? Ending up with workshops that were produced to the public. Since cities at the point were not enough, we decided to redesign an entire country, which is the Czech Republic last year, no? So we arrived with a certain ambition, I should confess, but when you work with Venice, nothing small. So, and then we decided to, with our students, work on ideas for what the future of an entire country could be, no? And then we took over the Faculty of Architecture of Prague, which is a very gray building. Actually, I think that rainbow flag over there is probably the only rainbow flag in the entire country. So then we, sort of performance, we ended up lifting up this big map of the country with these ideas from the students, no? Taking over that space, which has kind of not only performative side, but also a very symbolic one, taking over a space that is actually not allowed to be used, no? That concrete is sort of, in a way, sacred, no? Speaking of the values and the symbolicness of architecture in general. So this is where we try to break some rules over there. This was then the initial exercise, and then this is how it looked. It still stays there, so happily it stays, but then we went further, and when we decided to take over the next atrium of the faculty, building this large map of the Czech Republic with ideas for it, and making it become a platform for discussion, no? What is it that your country might end up being in the future if the ideas from the students are implemented? The ideas are far-fetched, but at the same time, they are really, as I mentioned, rooted in the present, no? This is how we keep working. And we keep disseminating, no? And we keep producing a certain program of activities and talks and conversations. We spoke about conversations earlier, no? About what not only curricular topics are, but trying to expand the conversation throughout the faculty with not only the BK talks, these kind of discussions, but also lots of exhibitions. This is work that I keep doing for the last years, in which I try to bring, let's say, different topics outside the curriculum to education. I think you were talking this morning about education and the future of pedagogy, no? I think that a very, very, very important part of what we teach at the faculties of architecture or any university is try to bring what you don't actually see in your curricula, no? So going into this exhibition, currently at Palazzo Mora, thank you very much again, in which we brought Africa, which is a topic I've been working on for many years already. I also had a chance of also working with Ai Weiwei, bringing him to the faculty and addressing different publics, no? Because I think that publics are shifting, and you need to start, let's say, getting out of academia in a way and addressing the shifting publics, no? There are many audiences. Here, probably we all agree that climate crisis is a crisis, but probably we go outside. For many, it's not. So how do we actually get out of those walls? This is what I try to do, and with the help of Ai Weiwei. And I really like that quote, because he says everything is art, but second, everything is politics. So let's not forget that. The fabrication of the city is, in the end, a political act. And that's something that we also try to tell our students. I do, anyway, this is talking about the present, you know, so that because we're speaking so much about the future and speculating on it, but also when you participate in competition awards, you have an agenda and you bring that agenda in the selection of the projects that then make it to the first prizes and the awards, no? I was recently also part of the jury of the Italian National Award. And what is the agenda that you bring in order to select projects, no? So, or how do you actually influence firms like MVRDV, producing a book, which is now KM4, which is going to be way bigger than KM3. Probably you know that book, no? And how do you exchange with the authors of all that amazing production in order to change the message that you want to pass to the publics? We all know that what we see on the internet, on Arc Daily, everybody knows it, all right? So we don't want another Arc Daily, let's say, archive. We want to transmit a certain message, and in this case, what we wanted to pass was the idea of acting. Again, in this case, it's called Agir in France, because the exhibition took place in France, no? How is it that we act? How is it that we intervene, if I may say, with all these projects? And I'm going to end up with images of the last installation that we produced. This is the Green Dip, which together here in Venice, we get a miniature. And thank you again to Palazzo Mora. There was no more space available, but in China, of course, things tend to get bigger. And we could do this exhibition, which starts with this corridor of urgencies, the crust section that we were showing earlier, trying to put the public on those urgencies, let's say, on their faces. And funny enough, a lot of material was actually censored by the Chinese regime. So we are lucky that still in Western Europe we can keep our freedom of expression. This is the final, this is the movie that we were talking about that you can see in Palazzo Mora, but shown in 360, etc., etc. It was a very nice immersion and an invitation for the public to dream, no? I don't think we need to say this is what the future will look like. I think what we need to say is like, imagine we can go through or experiment different futures. No? There's this idea of hope within the movies that we produce or the material that we produce. But doing this film or preparing this project, I received this email. And I'm not going to show who sent it, but I just highlighted one sentence there, no? Which is this one. And when you are confronted when you start receiving these emails, then we really need to work on narratives and perceptions, etc. We heard before, no, from Flavio, that was really nice. We are losing the battle of narrative and we are losing the battle of perception. And in the end, when you lose the battle of narrative and the battle of perception, this is what happens. This is 48 hours ago in my country, or the country where I reside. It's the Netherlands. Probably now I am at risk because this guy wants to kick us out, and I am legally there. So, and it's very interesting. I'm not going to enter in the details, but it's just like, first thing he's proposing is a freeze of asylum. We just spoke about it. A referendum on the European Union membership and more oil and gas extraction. We probably disagree with this, but a great majority of our fellow European citizens do agree. And that is the problem. The problem are the Orbans, the Hertz, the Le Pens, the Melonis, and company. So, and then, as an academic, I immediately tried to make this scientific. And I made a collaborator of mine print this map yesterday. Everything in gray is far right, ultra derecha, we say in Spanish. That comes first because it's more of a feeling. Everything in red is labor, and then everything in blue is rich. So, and then I looked at this other map, and these are the universities, main universities in the Netherlands. These are the universities where the students are, where knowledge is produced. And then I did very quickly this superimposition of knowledge versus vote. I'm not talking about urbanization, I'm talking about knowledge. So that we have a very big problem there, I would say, when we do not communicate our knowledge, when knowledge like the one we're exchanging here doesn't get out of here. This is what happens when it doesn't get out of our circles, is that everything around becomes gray. So I think that there, as scientists, academics, we need to work on the narrative. We need to work on that narrative in order to change perception, you know, and we need to probably try to influence people like those. Angela has been mentioned today. She's not coming back maybe, but he probably is. So how do we communicate better many of the things and much of the knowledge that we are talking about today? We all agree on the climate crisis. We all agree that immigration is not a risk, but they don't, especially him. Anyway, I invite you to please join us at Palazzo Mora and take a look at the film that we are just releasing there so that you dream a little bit of better worlds. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Javier and Adrien, thank you so much. It's always a delight to hear your presentations and to hear the new work that you're producing every single time. So thank you so much. Javier has been part of Shaping the City for 3 editions now. It has been in Venice, 2018, in Chicago, and today in Shaping the City, Venice. So we're extremely happy about that, to be a friend of STC and ECC, and more to come. We are wrapping our first day. It has been a very long and productive day with a lot of conversations and discussions. Tomorrow we're starting at 9 a.m. registration. 9:30 is the first panel about digital building technologies. Afternoon session, so that's going to be an entire morning. Afternoon session starts with a recap about Shaping the City in New Orleans that happened last month, followed by a conversation between Balazs Bognar, and Kengo Kuma. And the final conversation is a panel between the editor-in-chief of Domus, Walter, who's here with us today, and the managing editor of Arc Daily. So we're waiting for you all tomorrow, and everyone connected online as well. Chia.
So now we close the program for today. Thank you everyone staying with us today at Palazzo Michiel and everybody connected online. We received many questions that unfortunately we were not able to bring to the stage, but hopefully tomorrow we'll have more time. And we invite everybody to join us to Palazzo Mora, where we're going to have an aperitivo and where we can see the Green Deep just presented by Javier and Adrien, and all the other installations part of Time Space Existence. So thank you everyone, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.